listen intently. Sino mga nagmi-mix dito? Ilan ang member ng praise and worship group? Okay. So that is an important thing. You should understand or you should know what to listen for. Dapat alam niyo ang practice niyan ganito eh. Ang practice ganito. You listen to all types of music or you listen to everything that you think is listenable. Importante kasi yung nalalaman nyo yung mga nuances. For example, ito, yung mga nuances. Pag naglagay ako ng mask, nuances. Nakita niyo yung difference sa SS? Alam niyo kung bakit? Because the mask filters high frequency. Mga 10 kilohertz yan. Kaya hindi na masyado masakit sa tenga. You can actually do that by fiddling with the equalization. No? But nowadays, a lot of people are wearing masks anyway. So, pag naka-mask, alam nyo na dapat na pipihit kayo ng konti sa 10K o 8K. Tapos papakinggan nyo mabuti. So those are very important aspects that you should always understand. Know what to listen for. The other thing that you have to also understand is you listen at very low levels. Ano ang dapat at mixed position? At mixed position, if you can balance or you can listen at about 75 to 80 dB. Kasi pwede nyo naman tignan sa kung mayroon kayong app, no? Malalaman. Although, yung mga nada-download, they are not as accurate. But still, it can give you guide. 75 to 80 dB, that's good already. You have to understand that at that position, 75 dB, 75 dB is good enough. You know why? You follow the inverse square law. What does that mean? What does that mean? It means that if you have your church, and this is your balcony, and your position is here, you have your loudspeaker here, pointed that way, the stage is here, and if you are getting 80 dB here, at 1 meter, that's 80 dB, at double the distance, plus 6 dB, right? So 86 dB. Pag dumoble ka uli, double the double, that's another 6 dB, so that's already 92 dB. Okay? Double the double, you add another 6 dB, so that's 98 dB. So dito, 80 dB, estimating you, let's say ganon. So which means that the people here listening to the music here are being hit by 98 dB. Alam niyo ba gaano kalakas ang 98 dB? Mabibingi kayo. Which means that pag nag-measure ka doon, and it's more than, let's say, 80 dB, talagang tulig yung mga nasa harap. Remember, ang dB kasi, 1 plus 1 is not 2. 100 dB plus 100 dB is 103 dB. So in other words, if that is coming out with 100 dB, and that is coming out with another 100 dB, pag nandun ka sa gitna, na minomonitor mo siya, ang nare-receive mo is only 103 dB. Now, nag-add ka ulit ng another speaker. Kasi akala nung iba kasi, pag dinadamihan mo ng speaker, lalong lumalakas. It's not true. If you add another 100 dB, etong 100 dB plus 103 dB, 2 dB lang yan. So 105 dB. Anyway, we'll go into that later on. Okay, so yan ang line array, no? And then of course, it is expensive. I'll go into the other things later on. Medyo bilisan natin. Ito yung columnar type speakers. If you've noticed, yan yung ganyan, no? Yung kulay puti. Those are very efficient. There's a church at Duke University sa North Carolina. Ang haba ng simbahan, mas may malaking organo, no? Ang loudspeaker nila, dalawang ganyan lang. Isang nasa gitna, isang nandun sa malapit sa altar. Ganda ng tunog. Sa Vatican City, ganyan ang ginagamit nilang mga loudspeakers sa St. Peter's Basilica. No? So, again, it does not necessarily mean na pag nagdagdag ng loudspeakers, maganda. It depends on the design. It depends on the placement of the loudspeaker. Okay, and then let's go into, ang kagandahan kasi ng mga ganyan, mga columnar type, is that you can paint them eh. So, mayroong nakalagay dyan, nakalagay doon, hindi mo alam na loudspeaker pala. And then, yung low frequency niya, pwede mo i-extend. Lalagyan mo ng subwoofer, or you can adjust it. Tapos, steerable. Yung speakers mismo na itotono mo. Na ipupoint mo. Kung ayaw mong tumama yung loudspeakers mo sa sa side, pwede. No? And then, consistent front to back ang sound levels. Kasi, line array. In reality, they're small line arrays. They're small line array loudspeaker systems. And also, the other thing is they're not as expensive as your usual line arrays. Disadvantage naman, passive yung aiming, i-aim mo. Although, mayroong mga pwede mong electronically tilted, but these are more expensive kasi digital na yung sistema nun. And then it lacks SPL kasi maliliit eh. So yung throw niya hindi masyado malayo. And then less ang output niya. So mas marami ang gagamitin mo. Tapos yung horizontal pattern niya is not as big as compared to the big line arrays. There are some situations where you use actually both, no? You use these columnar loudspeakers and at the same time you use line arrays. Okay, so here you go. Yung loudspeakers, yung point source, gaya ng sinabi ko kanina, typically they're 40 to 60 degrees. Kung yun yung loudspeaker mo, yung papaganon is normally 60 degrees, yung papaganon is 40 degrees. Yung line array system, 20 by 110 degrees. Yung columnar, 30 by 90. Mas malapad yung columnar type. These are the three types of loudspeakers that are being used mostly in a lot of auditoriums and churches. Okay, here's another one. Is power equivalent to loudness? No. Ang matching, wattage, impedance, active or passive loudspeaker systems, ang amunod mo dapat, yung power handling ng loudspeaker, the loudspeaker should always be less than the power of your amplifier. Okay? Hindi malakas yung loudspeaker mo, mahina yung amplifier. Dapat, it should be no less than 2 times. Kung kunwari yung loudspeaker mo, kunwari ito, is 100 watts, dapat yung nagpa-power sa kanya, at least 200 watts. You get it? Dapat mas malakas yung amplification para wala kang square waves. Okay? And then of course, yung impedance, kung 8 ohms, 8 ohms. 4 ohms, 4 ohms. No? Or, you can actually use lower, let's say 4 ohms, pero in other words, hindi mo nire-restrict. Ang impedance kasi, restriction yan eh. Parang sakal. Kung 8 ohms yung sinasakal mong ganyan, para mas maluwag ng konti, para lumabas yung power, magiging 4 ohms. So, you can actually make use of a loudspeaker, yung lower yung kanyang impedance rating. Basta wag mo siyang sakalin. Pero the best would really be matched. No? And then of course, active and passive. Active, that means mayroon niyang sariling amplifier. Yun, wala kang problema. Yung mga loudspeakers na gano'n, kasi saksak ka na lang ng saksak eh. Kasi may sarili na siyang amplifier. Ang problema lang sa gano'n, pag sinabit mong gano'n, tapos nasira yung amplifier mo, paano na? Bababa mo ngayon yun. That's the reason why for hanging loudspeakers, it is actually more advantageous to use passive. Okay? Kasi hawak mo naman yung yung amplifier nasa baba. Pwede mong palitan yung amplifier anytime. Hindi kasi makadalasan na sumasabog yung mga loudspeakers na ganyan. Ang palaging pumuputok yung But if your loudspeaker is 2 times at least, 2.5 times or even 3 times, wala ka magiging problema. Okay? Kasi in that way, mayroon kang tinatawag nilang headroom. No? In other words, the other thing is that yung potentiometer na amplifier is not a volume control, ha? Alam niyo yun, no? Hindi siya volume control, no? That as a potentiometer, normally, ang setting niya nasa 2 o'clock. That's the best. But pwede mo itodo kung gusto mo. It does not necessarily mean na pag tinodo mo yung potentiometer, that means ibinuga mo yung power. Hindi ganun yun. That's just a control. Okay? So normally, pag nasa 2 o'clock, maglalaro ka na ng 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, you're good. Ituloy-tuloy lang natin itong slide presentation. Yung inverse square law, I explained it to you, no? 6 dB, habang nagdo-double yung distance. Okay. Wattage, power, synonymous to loudness. Ito yung pinag-uusapan natin kanina. It takes an amplifier 10 times more power to be perceived as being twice as loud. In other words, ang sinasabi nito, pag kunwari 100 watts, para magdoble yung loudness, dapat 10 times. So 1,000 watts dapat. Andito yan eh. Ayan, doubling the power output will result only to 3 dB loudness. 1 watt, 90 dB, 100 watts or 100 times is 110 dB. Again, mahirap intindihin ng mga dB. Ang sabi ni Craig Anderton, who's a well-known audio guru, it is most consistent way of rating an amplifier but not the most accurate or indicative of how loud it is, no? Ang sabi niya ganun nga is that, yun nga, gaya nito, a huge increase in power but only a double or 4 times increase in terms of perceived volume levels. So pag kunwari gusto mong doble yung loudness, times 10. Okay? Ayan. Is wattage synonymous to loudness? Look at that. Yung 2 watts, 93 dB. 1,024 watts, 120 dB. 1,000 yan, 1,000 watts. Tignan nyo yung 32 watts, 105. That's good enough. 64 watts, 108. So, a big power, loudspeaker power, does not necessarily mean that you have a lot of juice. It may be true to a certain extent, but that's because of your headroom. You know, so basta ang importante dyan is that yung matching ng speaker mo at saka yung amplifier should be okay. So at least yung amplifier mo should be twice the loudspeaker rating. Okay? Ito yung adding... Gusto niyo ba ito? Okay. Etong sikreto dyan. When 2 dB values differ by, like I said, 100 watts plus 100 watts, anong difference nila? Wala, 0. What does it say? Pag 0 or 1, you add 3. That's the reason why it's 103 dB. You get it? Now, yung susunod, 103 plus 100, anong difference? 3 dB. So, 2 or 3, 2 na lang. Ang ina-add nyo. Nakaw nyo? Kung kunwari, 4 or 8, let's say, let's say 100, tapos 110 dB. Ang difference is 10. The difference, the difference is 10. Okay, the difference is 10, so it's 9 or more. That means that your dB is what? 110. You get it? Because 100 plus 110, 10 yung difference. Now in the chart, it says 9 or more yung difference ng dalawa. Therefore, ang i-add mo 0. So you get the highest rating. In this case, the rating is 110, so it maintains 110. You get it? Anyway. Let's go on. Yan. Ito yung inverse square law na kinikwento ko kanina. At 1 meter, 90 dB. Sa 2 meters, minus 6 dB na kagad. So, 84. Di ba? Etc., etc., etc. Inverse square law. Habang dumodoble, less ng less. Okay. Etong setup. Okay. See, look at that. Your long distance coverage. Ito yung tinatanong mo. Yan. Yun ang coverage. Kasi normally 60 degrees yan. Short distance, long distance. Consistent coverage should be 2 times, but anyway, is greater than y. Your y is that one, and then of course your x is this one. So your long is 2 times of your x should be that one. Yun ang ibig sabihin yan. Ito naman, yung, if let's say you have to angle your loudspeakers nasa baba, ganun na mangyayari. So, very narrow yung tinatapon mo. That's the reason why you hang loudspeakers. para mas consistent ang tapon mo. Compared to this one, no? Okay? Ito naman, using dalawang loudspeaker na yan. Meron kang isa to take care of the back portion, meron kang isa banda rito. Now, the reason why you do that, because of the angles na. Diba? You have to understand it's only 40 degrees eh. So pag dinalawa mo, magiging 80 degrees na yon. And then you would have your 60 degrees. Do you get it, more or less? Just to give you an idea, no, of how things are supposed to be. Asan na yung line array? Okay, ito, horizontal coverage. If you've noticed, yung mga central cluster system na would fill, that means you would have your front, kasi yung front binaba mong ganun eh, so mas malapad. Habang lumalayo kasi, di ba, remember what I was telling you? But habang lumalayo kasi, luminipis yung coverage. So ganun ang mangyayari. Yung front mo, to take care of the front, to have a wider array of the front, and then yung back mo to take care of the... So, dalawang speaker yan. Isang nakaganon, nakaturo doon, isang speaker na nandito to take care of this portion. Ang line array system, since each loudspeaker has a particular coverage, ganun ang nangyayari. Naipo-point mo exactly. Kaya yung J angle na yan, may ibig sabihin yan. May mga angling yan na sinusunod para tama yung coverage mo. Hindi lang ginagawang J yon because it has to be done that way. No. Okay? May mga reason behind it. Ito, ang line array system. See, look at that. Yung pinakamataas takes care of the farthest. Yung pinakamababa takes care of front. But there is one thing that you should understand. Normally, sometimes you don't need anymore to put so much loudspeaker angle in front. Kasi it's normal eh. Mas malapit ka sa source of sound eh. So, dinig mo na lahat. So, bakit pa kailangang tutukan ng todo-todo? So, ang nangyayari, yung banda nun sa likod, doon ang malakas. Tapos pahina ng pahina. And normally, the way it is, the line array system can provide you with that. Pwedeng gawin ganon. Ito yung sinasabi ko. Etong gitna, if you notice, butas, di ba? But that's okay. Now, the reason behind that is because he will listen to my voice maski na walang amplification anyway. You know? And normally, the way it is that the pastor, for example, or the singer, for instance, can actually go down here and walang feedback. Kasi walang coverage eh. Butas eh. Hindi tinatamaan ng loudspeaker. Okay? Ngayon, kung gusto mong i-full, 3 ang coverage. Merong center, merong left, right, para mako-cover mo yung entire hall. Again, it depends on your purpose. At it depends on the objective, no? Kung bakit ginawang ganon. Ayan, horizontal coverage, stereo or mono setup. Ang mga disadvantages, ito kasi, ang nangyayari, itong gitna, because dalawang loudspeaker nagsasama eh. In reality, nagkakaroon yan ng plus 3 dB. Diba, dalawa eh. Pag nagsapaw silang ganun, yung 100 dB, pagdating doon sa gitna, there's a possibility that it could be 103 dB. But since it is fringes, and normally, the way it is, especially for speech frequency, wala naman sa low frequency yun, 500, Normally kasi minimeasure nila ang response ng loudspeakers at mid-frequency, 500 or 1K. No? Since nasa fringes naman ang frequency, minsan hindi nangyayari talaga yung 103 dB. Doon sa gitna, doon sa pinagsapawan. But, what they do is this. Pero, dapat, meron ka ng milliseconds. Yan ang formula, DS, yung distance, kung ano yung delay, nung field loudspeakers mo, is X over C times 1,000. C is the speed of sound. No? Tapos, yung X is distance from the main speaker in feet. So, palagay natin yun, mula ron hanggang dun, ano yung distance na yun. But the easiest way of doing it, 1:1. Diba? Kaysa mag-compute ka pa. See, normally when you're in the field, mathematically, you have to think ano ba solusyon? And then you adjust it by ear. And like I said, all you have to do is tap. Pag hindi delay kasi yung nandun sa likod, magdodoble yan Mauuna yon kasi nandun ka Mauuna yon, mauhuli to. Ganun na mangyayari. Ayan, yung sinasabi ko kanina, the field speakers do not need full low frequencies. And you'll probably want to delay them by an extra millisecond using the Haas effect to create the illusion that all of the sound is coming from the mains, from the front. Kasi feel lang siya Hindi mo naman kailangan lagyan siya ng baho Ang importante doon yung intelligibility, yung SS. Kasi ang voice, especially voice, singing or whatever, is concentrated within mid-frequencies. Placement of loudspeakers in the hall. Pag regular lang, ang mangyayari, walang wall, walang increase ng bass response. Pag naglagay ka ng nilagay mo yung loudspeakers, tabi ng wall, nag-a-add ka ng 6 dB. Pag dalawang wall, it's 12 dB already. Ngayon, trihedral. Actually, nearby one wall, no? Tapos ito, dalawa, left and right, up, back at saka side. Tapos ito, tatlo na, kasi plus yung up, 18 dB boost. That's actually, pero if you've noticed, ang boost niya is only on the low frequency. Yung mataas na ganun. Low frequency niya, 500 Hz yung gitna Wala ka dun sa high frequency. That's the reason why there are a lot of situations where you hear loudspeakers nilalagay sa kanto. Yun, pampadagdag lang ng bass yun. But in terms of loudness, wala. Or yung intelligibility. Okay? Any questions so far? Ito, dali ha? Itong 3 nearby wall, that means back, left, and the floor. Yung floor kasi adds. Or pag tinagay mo nun sa itaas, that adds also. Okay? So, ganun na sistema. Alright. There has to be a smooth transition from one loudspeaker to the other. And there has to be an even response throughout the listening area. That's the reason why dapat wala kang null areas. There are some situations, pag nakaupo kang ganyan, gumanyan ka ng konti, nagbabago yung tunog. Sa mga areas yun na nagkakaroon ng intersection. Or for that matter, because of certain problems, nagkaroon ng phase cancellation. That's the reason why yung pag-design nung background music, no? Kinukompute yun, hindi lang, lagay tayo speaker dyan. Lagay mo na isa doon. Lagay isa doon. Hindi ganun. Kasi, may kanya-kanyang dispersion. If this is your hall, your sitting level is normally 1.2 meters. Handyan yung tenga mo, dito ka nakaupo. Yung mga tao, ganyan. Basically, yung upo nila is approximately 1.2 meters. Maglalagay ka dito ngayon ng loudspeaker, let's say 60 degrees yan, tatamaan yun. Eh, naglagay ka ng isa rito, eh, may nakaupo rito. Ano na? Dapat, nandito, para magkukross siyang ganon. Para makukover. Kukunin mo yung sitting position. And of course, you have to take into consideration also the fact na magkakaroon ng various things, no? Like for example, yun nga, yung mga, kung mayroong sidewall, di ba, gaano kalayo, gusto mo bang mas basic, gusto mo bang, yung mga ganon. Okay. So what is very important is that there has to be an even response throughout the listening area. Hindi masakit sa tenga, walang mga null points na kung konting gumanyan ka, nagbabago yung tunog. Vertical coverage. Kung vertical ang coverage na gusto mo mangyari, try to achieve maximum coverage by tilting the loudspeakers minus 6 degrees. So palagay natin naka-stand, ang tilt mo is 6 degrees. Assure a 1 meter height distance at the back wall. Ito yung sinasabi ko na 1 meter dapat dun sa likod. Okay? Pag nakalagay sa stage, yung 6 degrees mo, mas malaki yung coverage. That's the reason again why we hang loudspeakers. Vertical coverage, pag naka-tier yung flooring, palagay natin pagdating doon, biglang taas ng ganon, yung problema ng yung sa movie house kasi naka-tier yun eh. Upuan nyo sa likod eh. Ganon na mangyayari. So you can actually just tilt it in such a way that you have enough coverage for the area. Kasi natural kasi yung ano mo eh, yung tilt ng flooring mo eh. So that gives you the advantage. Position of loudspeakers in the stage. If you look, tignan nyo yung ano, pag nasa gitna, no, normally, your loudspeaker should be at least at the tip of yung stage. Pero ako, ang palagi kong ginagawang practice, I put something like a distance, something like siguro mga 2 to 3 feet. Well, in this case, lip nung ano, no, in that way kasi, you actually prevent feedback already. So maski na saang placement ka, walang howling, hindi siya nag-feedback. Now if you've noticed, yung area na kino-cover niyan, etong area to, actually is null almost. But like I said, since kayo mas malapit sa akin, you can hear my voice still. No? But in some cases, kung kulang na kulang talaga, naglalagay sila ng frontal fills. Lalagay ng speaker dyan o speaker doon. Subwoofer. Arrangements, no? Ang broadside array, parang ganito ha. Each side of the stage, there can be a buildup of energy resulting in a power alley. As energy of it arrives at the same time and in phase with one another, summing together. Unfortunately, moving left or right of this center summation, one will find cancellation alleys. Pag kunwari itong dalawang to, nandun, yung isa nandun, yung isa nandun. Broadside array yan. Yan, typical. Gradient array. Yung gradient array naman, dalawang subwoofer, array, they're actually on each side of the stage. And then, hindi, mali. Broadside yan. Ito, gradient. Ini-stack. Ito, pinapatong dun. Pero yung isang loudspeaker nakaturo dito, yung isang loudspeaker nakaturo dun. Why? Because in that way, what's happening, yung polarity, the cabinets, ang mangyayari kasi nun, nagiging, if you notice, nagiging heart shape. So yung likod, walang masyadong sub. Wala ka masyadong narinig. Ayan, polarity invert the cabinet that faces away from the audience and delay it by the depth of the subwoofer. Depth. Di ba yung sinasabi ko kanina na dapat may distance? No? Okay? Okay, so this is all. Ito, end-fire subwoofer arrangement. Ito naman, dalawa na they're in a row, they're on the same axis, pero yung isa, baliktad din. Ganun ang So again, ang gusto mo mangyari, walang masyadong pumupunta sa stage, lahat papunta sa harap, and certain areas aside. If you want to know more about these things, you can actually go into some of the speaker manufacturers and you can actually research more on it, no? Ito, time alignment for a smooth transition. Look at the way they put the subwoofers and yung layo ng loudspeaker. Kasi dapat yung low frequency mo at saka yung high frequency mo sabay ang dating. You have to understand that high frequency travels faster than the low frequency. That's the reason why in this case, nakaurong ang subwoofer. Kasi mahuhuli siya eh. So para mag-time align siya, doon sa main, yung high mid mo, ilalayo mo yung high mid mo, push mo yung subwoofer in front. Ito yung the usual, no? You look at the second drawing, this one, para maging align siya. In this case kasi, talagang naka-set up na siya in such a way that they're really time aligned. Now the other one, separate, since they're separate from each other, ilalayo mo yung sub mo in such a way na nasa harap compared to your mid-high. Yan. See, you delay the subs by a few milliseconds to the mid-high. Again, the best way to do it is 1:1. At kung medyo mahilig ka sa math, you can actually do that in a more precise manner. Now, there's some software that can actually give you those calculations. No? Naka-drawing pa eh. So alam mo na kung saan mo puposisyon. But again, the most important thing is how do you interpret the results? Yan. Kung mayroon kang may mga speakers na ganyan, yan, mayroon kang fill, tapos mayroon kang naka-fly, dapat lahat yun, there should be in such a way that they're all aligned, time aligned. So tama ang dating. And normally, the way it is that ang reference mo palagi, yung nasa main, yung front of house, yung nasa stage. Dapat, pag nakaupo ka ron, ang naririnig mo pa rin, yung nasa stage. Do you have any questions so far? Medyo binibilisan ko lang ng konti because, yun na nga. Para at least makatapos tayo ng isa. So the same way, no? You have to calibrate multi-loudspeaker systems. Yung mga delays nyo, yung mga nandun sa likod and everything else, they have to be done in such a way that they are all time aligned with each other, whether it be low frequency or your mid-high. Ayan, it takes about 45 milliseconds for sound to travel at 50 feet. So almost 1:1. Pero for easier remembrance, 50. 50 milliseconds to 50 feet. So 1:1. If you put your delay speakers 50 feet away from the front of house system, you need to delay the signal going to the satellite system by 45 or 50 milliseconds. Okay? Ito is, again, it's the mathematical calculation. The thing to remember is 1.13. You divide the distance measured in feet by 1.13. So you get the milliseconds. Ang kagandahan naman nito, if you understand all these and you can actually do all these things, ang ganda ng tunog nyo. Ang linaw. Ang ganda hanggang doon sa likod. Walang kaproblema. Ang daling mag-mix. Again, this is part of the positioning, of the satellite system by making use of an SPL meter, no? Ang sabi dito, if you are standing 30 feet from the left side of the main system and 10 feet from the left side of the delay system, the amount or the output of the main system is 85 dB. The output of the delay system should also be about 85 dB. Yun ang pagkuha. So the way to do it is that 30 feet, no? Tapos yung 10 feet. Kung 30 feet, tapos 10 feet all the way back, kung ang position na yon, pag mineasure mo yung dito, in-out mo muna yung satellite system is 85 dB. Again, this is very loud. Pag mineasure mo yung doon, hindi kasama itong front of house, should be 85. Hindi. Pag pinagsama mo na pareho, summation, should be total of 85 dB. Parang walang distance problem, no? And then here, delay system in terms of yung lower frequencies. But the way to do it, okay, stage plot. This is the normal stage plot, how the instruments and the loudspeakers are positioned. So if you've noticed, you would have your side fill for the people who are actually doing the vocals. You would have your lead guitar there, your bass guitar here. You would have your keyboard and then drum kit. Yung drum kit mo, dapat meron kang drum fill. No? And then, if you've noticed, etong mga to are your monitors, no? Input connectivity, simple lang, no? If you just have an ordinary microphone and a guitar, and then you would have your splitters, yung papuntang effects, and then you would have your other things, no, for your front of house or outside speakers and everything else. The monitor setups. Ito yung sa large input connectivity naman, no? Monitor setups. See, look at the way they put the loudspeaker setups. Now, bakit yung main vocalist dalawa yung loudspeakers niya? The reason behind that is because most microphones, either they are cardioid or hypercardioid. Ang ano kasi, ang what you are trying to avoid is yung likod. No? Para wala ka masyadong feedback. Now, the reason why you have to put it sideways and everything else, so you're creating a null area in the middle. But it does not necessarily mean that you have to have two monitor speakers, because you can actually make use of one. Well, nowadays, a lot of people are actually using IEM, no? Which is good to a certain extent, but again, it depends eh. Because like for example, in my case, ako ayoko ng IEM. I still prefer monitors. Nasanay kasi ako sa ganun eh. And I prefer playing, using my amp. No? Instead of being nakasaksak. Pwede siguro naka-mic in, no? Pero yung straight way into the mixer, I prefer na ako mismo yung nagtitimpla. Kasi in the first place, I don't want my guitar to be in the monitors. Overkill eh. Alam ko yung iba dyan, mayroon na silang cab sa likod. Gusto pa nila narinig yung kanilang gitara sa monitors. Gusto pa nila narinig sa IEM. Sobra-sobra na yon. That is going to actually create a lot more problems. Kasi ang daming sources eh. Ang daming sources. So the best way, sa akin, the best way really is for the guitar player to control his volumes and just get cues from the engineer. Pag sabihin nung sound tech, sabihin niya, boss, masyado malakas yung gitara mo. O di babaan. Diba? Ganun lang naman eh. Ito mga levels, normally, which is, it's reference level, but it's subjective. Kung acoustic, folk, spoken word, mga 75 to 90 dB, jazz is about 80 to 95, classical is about 100 dB, house of worship, 90 to 95 dB, no? Electric, it's about 90 to about 110 dB. Ang modern rock and roll is about 130 dB. Ang jet plane, you're about 10 meters away from the engine of a jet plane, is 130 dB. So yung pinapakinggan yung rock and roll is equivalent to the sound of the engine of a 747. Ganun yun. Now what happens? Yun. This is calibrating for front of house. But if we are going to go into this, medyo mahaba-haba. Because what I want to do is I want you to go home with something as a takeaway. But we'll go over here just for you to be able to come out with an idea on how to do things. You always work on unity gain. Dapat, as much as you can, No? Again, there are ways of calibrating your mixing board, for example. Ako, ang gusto ko, yung faders ko dire-diretso. Tapos I work with the gain. No, doon ko pina-fine tune. Yung iba kasi, gusto man nila, dire-diretso yung gain, tapos dito. No? But you have to understand the difference between the gain and the fader is that yung gain, konting galaw mong ganun, iba ang lakas nun compared dun sa fader. Okay? But you always work on unity gain. Dapat naka-zero para malinis ang tunog. Ayan, unity gain is the setting at which the signal level is neither boosted nor attenuated. It is usually marked by a 0 or U on the mixer. Now, pag you work on that particular area of unity gain, no? Like I said, you are assured na tama ang voltage na nilalabas mo coming from your mixing board. Oh, the other thing is that outboard processors connected between the mixer and your loudspeakers, you have to bypass. Okay? Ito kasi instructions na to calibrating in front of house. Ito, ringing out stage monitors. Yan ang usual problem No? How to ring out. Yan, kunan na lang ninyo ng picture. Kung po pwede, yes.
Hello po. Question lang po about sa stage monitors po. Kasi po ang setup po namin is may dalawa po kaming monitors and yun lang po. Yung banda po ay naka-in-ear and then sa mga singers po actually para sa kanila po yung yung dalawang monitors po. But the problem po is sometimes ang nangyayari parang mas nagiging, especially during praise and worship po, ang nangyayari parang mas nagiging malakas yung monitors kaysa sa main speakers po. Paano po ang magandang setup doon? Kasi kung hihinaan naman po namin, ang reklamo po ng singers, hindi po nila marinig yung sarili nila or yung mga instruments. So, yun po yun lang po ang source namin sa stage po. The rest is naka-in-ear po.
Yung mga singers naka-in-ear din, hindi?
Hindi po. Bali, yun po yung pinaka-monitor nila, yung dalawa.
Dadalawang speaker?
Opo.
Okay. Gaano kalayo yung loudspeakers ninyong ganito? Sa harap, yes. Okay. Ang nangyayari, mas malakas yung inyong monitor kaysa yung front of house.
Opo, minsan po ganun po ang nangyayari.
Okay. Ang problema nyo, malakas yung banda.
Actually, naka-electronic drums po kami and then wala po kaming amps. Naka-direct po lahat sila sa front of house po.
Okay.
And then kung ano lang po yung gusto ng singers na lumabas sa monitors nila na instrument, ina-adjust po. Pero hindi ko po maintindihan kung bakit po pag hinihinaan namin, nagrereklamo po sila na hindi sila magkarinigan. Pero pagka po nandito po sa audience, ang dating po, mas malakas po yung monitors kaysa sa main speakers po.
Normally kasi, the way it should be is that complementary dapat. Yung front of house should complement, or the monitors should complement the front of house. Dapat ganun ang mangyayari. In other words, dapat yung volume nitong monitors should be not as loud as it is perceived by the audience. Otherwise, kasi, ang mangyayari, kasi mayroong may line, may demarcation line. Ito lang yan Dapat ang tunog ng monitors hanggang dyan lang Therefore, kung gano'n na nangyayari, there are two things. Number one, there's a possibility that the dispersion of your monitor speakers are not good enough to cover. Kasi like I said, they have to, the singers have to be as near to the monitors as they can be. No? For them to be able to hear themselves. Okay? Secondly, kung hindi po pwede yun, dapat mag-in-ear sila. I think that's the other way of doing it.
Advisable po ba na maglagay po ng acoustic treatment sa stage po? For example po, ayan po yung wall na yan. Lalagyan po ng acoustic boards.
Ano mangyayari? Wala.
Medyo... wala rin po.
That's actually the reason why, ganito kasi yan, no? Contrary to what the belief of a lot of people, the source should not be impeded. Ako, yun ang belief ko. Kasi doon lang gagaling ang sound eh. Pag naglagay ako ng absorbers dyan, inabsorb ko na yung sound dito. Pati yung monitor, hihina. Pati lalakas ka na naman. Ano mangyayari? Di, mas malakas doon. Pati ganun din ang problema. That's the reason why ako, when I design churches, sorry palaging, kasi yun ang experience ko eh. No? Hindi ko tinitreat ito. Kasi, it's the same way as when I'm talking. When I'm talking this way, ito yung boses ko. Pag naglagay ngayon ako ng absorber, ano mangyayari? Ano mangyayari ngayon? Di magiging ngongo. Yun ang nagiging problema. There are two ways of doing it. Your side wall can be, eto kasi, yung original ito, meron pang kakabit sila, pastor, dito na side wall diffusers to diffuse the sound sa front. At saka, eto are the ones bringing the sound to the back. The most efficient absorbers and the least cost, yung pinakamurang absorber, are actually these ones, polycylindrical diffusers. Yan ang pinakamura po na diffuser. Kasi pag gagamit ka yung mga diffuser na mamahalin, unang-una, more often than not, it doesn't work. Secondly, it's very expensive. Magsasabit ka ng isang ganyan, cost you 50,000 each. Di ba? That's the reason why, ako kasi, when I design, I take into consideration cost effectiveness. Sayang yung pera eh. So can you imagine 50,000, magkano na yan? Samantalang ito gagawin mo lang Plywood lang yan and it works. Scientifically, it is the most efficient way of treating a hall, diffusing a hall, no? So ganon. So you never treat the stage area. Meron akong kliyente, it's a church in Philinvest. Ang sabi nung worship pastor nila, Mike, sabi ganun, bakit pag kumakanta kami sa stage, hindi kami nagkakarinigan? Sabi ko, kinarpet niyo yung floor, naglagay kayo ng absorber doon, absorber dito, absorber doon, hindi kinulob mo ng lahat. It's basically the same thing as when you're singing inside the bathroom, di ba? When you're inside the bathroom, since it's highly reverberant, ang ganda ng tunog. Kumanta kayo sa loob ng closet. Pangit. Same. So, ang solusyon dun, if you can add one more loudspeaker para ilapit doon sa mga singers, that can probably be worth it. That's one. Number two, make it a point na hindi lahat ng bagay na nasa stage, nasa monitor. Ako, I just put voices. That's it. I don't put anything anymore. Sasabihin ng iba, hindi, dapat lagyan ng piano. No. Yung piano katabi mo may amplifier naman siyang mag-isa At saka nandidinig mo sa sa front of house Yeah.
Hello po, hello. Yung sa church po namin kasi, kami po ay, yung area ng church namin nasa crossing. So, ang issue talaga sa amin, kapag may dumadaang, like nung itong election, kapag may kampanya, ang lakas, talagang na-overpower yung nasa loob po ng church, yung sound po. Even po yung main speaker namin, nadi-disrupt po yung pastor namin kapag may dumadaang mga malalakas po na powered engine na vehicle po. Ngayon po, sa ano po kaya yung pwede namin gawin para po ma-eliminate po namin yung background noise sa labas po ng church namin. Since yung area namin is talagang
Crossing.
crossing, talaga pong daanan po ng mga sasakyan. Ano po kayong pwede naming alternative libat ng church? Yun po.
Actually, the way it is, kung ako magde-design ng church nyo, gigibain ko yung church. No, seriously. Seriously. Ang problema ninyo kasi, no, is insulation and isolation. Nangyari yan nung ginawa ko yung CCF sa Mactan, sa Cebu City, at sa 2,500-seater church. No? Doon sa katabi nung ginagawa, kasi warehouse yun na malaki-malaki. Nung ginagawa namin yon, kausap ko yung senior pastor, sabi ko sa senior pastor, Pastor, sabi ko siya, okay lang ba sa inyo na ganito ang mangyayari? Na nadidinig niyo yung, kasi doon sa katabi nila, they sell cars. Alam niyo naman, pag nagbibenta sila ng mga auto, di ba nagpapatugtog sila ng mga disco-disco. So sabi ko doon sa pastor, sabi ko yun, Pastor, okay lang ba na habang nagpipreach ka, bug, 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 bug. Sabi niya, ako, Mike, hindi yata pwede yan. O sabi kong gano'n, ang gagawin ko, triple ceiling yan. Triple ceiling. In other words, in-enclose ko yung buong simbahan. So, nung ginagawa na ngayon yung simbahan, bumabagyo sa labas. Andun kami sa loob lahat. Paglabas namin lahat, may bagyo pala. Yun. Kasi in acoustics, there are two things that you have to consider. One is insulation, isolation, and then the other one is acoustic conditioning. Acoustic conditioning is the same thing as air conditioning. The only difference is that yung air conditioning sa ating, di ba? Para malamig and everything else. Yung acoustic conditioning, para yung tunog, maganda. In the case of this church, tinignan ko na, unang-una, yung area is tahimik enough. Kasi mahal talaga i-isolate ang simbahan. Napakamahal. Like for example, yung studio ng GMA, tabi nung MRT. Sabi ko sa kanilang ganon, sabi ko, sigurado ba kayong gusto nyo yung studio rito? Bakit hindi na lang natin baliktarin? Yung live studio, yung nandun sa likod, yung nasa likod, yun ilagay natin dito sa harap. Kasi live studio naman Live studio, maingay, okay lang yon. Alam mo sagot sa akin? Tapos na yung plano Okay. Sabi ko, tapos na yung plano, gagastos naman kayo. Sabi niya, okay. Gumastos nga sila. Naka-float yung buong studio. Pag sinara mo yung pinto, wala ka na marinig. Maski na maghihiyaw ka sa loob. But see, at saka yung trend, hindi mo marinig. Tapos, sinukat ko pa yon. Sinukat namin. Tinignan ko yung mga noise. We measured it 24 hours. Meron kami mga measurement devices, no? Yung pala, doon sa area yon, paahon kasi yung paahon yung lugar na yun Pag paahon, at saka may train station Pag umaandar yung train, dahan-dahan, hindi maingay. Pero yung mga truck na galing sa EDSA, na walang laman, na malalaki, pagkatapos tumatakbo sila, papaganon. Yun ang maingay. So, alam na namin kung ano yung problem. So, the only solution was that, to isolate the entire church. I mean, the entire studio. So, normally, when I make a design, or when I make consultation with churches, tinatanong ko palagi, maingay ba dyan? I actually take note already of what causes. Meron akong isang kinukonsult na church dyan sa may Novaliches dati. maraming tricycle naman. Ang laking problema yon. Kasi pag nag-andaran na raw yung mga tricycle, ang ingay, ganon. Alam niyo kung anong pinagawa kong solusyon? Maglagay kayo ng trompa at loudspeaker sa labas. O, di, ingay sa ingay, bahala na kayo. Di ba? Okay lang kasi ang nangyayari, yung ingay naman ng church, yun din naman iniingay nila doon. So nagbibilid sa loob ng church, nagkakaroon ng enhancement. So okay lang, nagkakaintindihan sila. O di ayos. Di ba? Maraming solusyon. No? This is another classic example. It's common sense. I was consultant for GMA 7, yung kanilang studio, kanilang tower dito sa Novaliches. Kino-complain nila, pag umandar raw yung generator, no? Ang ingay, talagang ingay na maingay. Talagang ganun. Yan sabi ko, ang gagawin natin, if we are going to isolate your generators, sabi ko ganun, well, there are two things. Either you buy a new generation, ilang watts yung mga megawatt yung mga generators nila. Parang 3 yata, tigpa 500 megawatt. Parang ganun, malaki. Ang ingay talaga. Sabi ko ganun, we'll put minimal isolation just to appease yung neighborhood na mayroon tayong ginawa. Tapos, eto ba, pwede niyong gawin? Sabi nila, ano yon? Pwede bang bigyan niyo ng bawat bahay ng generator? Generator power. Isang saksakan for electric fan, isang saksakan para sa refrigerator. Ginawa. Ano nangyari? Tumahimik. Kasi pag brownout, may kuryente sila eh. Di ba? Oh, di ba? Magko-complain ka? Di ba? There's another church sa Caloocan naman. Kilala ni pastor yun eh, yung pastor doon. But anyway, ang problem nila, masyadong sagad yung church doon sa isang bahay. Yung bahay, nandun dito sa baba, ang may-ari matanda na. Siyempre, usually, mga matatanda, maraming complain and everything else, no? So, sabi ko gano'n, at saka nagko-complain yung barangay kasi maliit yung church hindi naman kalakihan yung kalye, tabi-tabi yung mga bahay. So, sabi ko gano'n, is there a way that you can conduct mga cooking classes, mga gano'n, yung mga fellowship na pwedeng gawin and everything else? O daw. So sabi ko, is there a way that when you conduct yung mga cooking classes, ang gawin nyo, yung produkto, let's say cake, gano'n, i-distribute natin sa mga kapitbahay? O daw. Tahimik. Naging Christian pa yata yung mga kapitbahay. O, they solve. Di ba? Simple. Wala ka masyadong ginastos. Di ba? You saved souls pa. O. So, yun ang problema nyo. Ang mahirap dun is that if you are going to insulate the church, it will be very expensive. Dapat yun, that should have been done from the very start. That's the reason why it is important that if you choose, let's say, a place to place a church, make sure na yung lugar quiet enough. No? Kasi hindi yung pag umulan nagkakaroon ng drumming effect yung bubong. Ito walang problema kasi may ceiling eh. No? Pag nagkaroon ng drumming effect, hihinto talaga yung service eh. Unless okay lang. Okay lang sa pastor, okay lang doon sa congregation. Pero nakakaano eh, di ba? O for that matter, kunwari ganito, pagkatapos meron kayong quiet time, tapos may dadana, parang, di ba? Nakakalito. So, yun ang magiging problema. Is that your permanent church already? Yung permanent, temporary, yun. Oo. So, for the meantime, pangatawan na lang muna. Di ba? Ganun na lang ang sistema doon. Because that's the only way. You just have to be practical. Unang-una, sayang ang pera. Di ba? Like in most churches that or actually clients ko na, for example, studios or whatever, unang-una kong tinatanong, is the place yours? Pag sinabi niyang nagre-renta lang sila, mag-isip-isip muna tayo. Tapos ano ang kontrata mo? Pag sinabi niyang 1 year, tama na, huwag na tayong gumawa ng simbahan dyan. At least 5 years to 10 years. Para at least mabawi mo lang yung i-invest mo. Kasi pipintahan mo, aayusin mo, and everything else, di ba? Well, in their case, itong Lord's Way, there's no problem kasi kanila na itong lugar na ito. So, whether, they put whatever things inside there, it's permanent, di ba? So, it's practicality also. But then, of course, there are some na kailangan mo talaga, you have to use, let's say, a shopping center, no? For a church. For the longest time, yung aming church yung Bread from Heaven, yung kami nasa Shangri-La kami, yung isa is part ng parking lot, no? Yung ganon. Doon kami nag-worship, pero inayos naman namin and everything else. But at least minimal yung ginastos. Pero matagalan bago kami lumipat. Yung ganon, no? So those are things that have to be considered. Kung walang permanency, yung lugar, pag-iisipan muna. But like I said, sometimes kasi importante rin yung madali, no? Yung madaling ma-reach ng tao. For example, in the case of yung Stantia, yung Victory Stantia, I designed a church there, and that's right in Stantia, sa mismong shopping center. Ang kagandahan naman doon, pag lumabas ka, andun na lahat ng mga restaurants, andun lahat yung mga di ba? So, maganda. So, they're keeping that one. So, again, it really depends on a lot of situations. Pero as much as you can, yun nga, ayaw mong gumastos ng masyadong malaki. Sayang yung pera. Pang-evangelize na lang, di ba? Or you give it to the needy or something like that. Di ba? Okay? Does that answer your question? Yung isa, that answers your question also? Yung sa monitor? Okay na yun? Oo. Add siguro another loudspeaker. Oo. Or if it's, ilan yung worship, yung singers ninyo? So, 9 lahat? 9 lahat? Maximum. Ano ang typical? Ilan? 6? 6. Okay. Ang pinakamaganda kasi noon, kung gano'n ang situation nyo, 6, ano ang normal complaint nila? Anong hindi nila naririnig? Just go. Yes. Well, that's a usual problem of a lot of churches. Yung nga nagiging problema. Oo. Hindi nila marinig yung sarili nila. Ito, kwento. This is being done. I don't know if other churches do this here in the Philippines, no? But I saw this about 5 years ago because my son is a worship leader sa isang simbahan C3 sa New Zealand. Tumutugtog siya doon, nag-lead and everything else. Nag-lead as in lead guitar and lead as in vocals. Siya lang yung Pilipinong worship leader. Anyway, alam nyo, pag kumakanta sila, kasi mayroong isang 2 babae, siya, isa pang lalaki, pagkatapos isang babae. So 5, no? Pero pag kumanta sila, ang kapal ng tunog. Ang ganda ng tunog. Tapos there's a keyboard player, okay? Tapos drummer, bass guitar player, 2 silang gitarista. He plays lead and the other guy plays rhythm. No? Ang kapal ng tunog, ang kapal ng instrumentation. Sabi ko, ba't ganun ang tunog nyo? Paano nyo ginagawa yun? No? So, anyway, tinignan ko ngayon, paano nila ginagawa? Itinuro ko ngayon itong itong concept na ito sa CCF main. Now, I don't know who exactly was the one responsible for telling the worship team how to do it. But I was made to understand kasi kaibigan ko yung mga ano doon sa technical, no, sa live production, no. Sinasabi nila na gano'n na nga ginagawa nila. Okay? Alam niyo kung paano? May naka-record. Okay. Alam niyo kung paano? Ito, gawin niyo kung kaya niyong gawin. But it can be done. Yes. Pag kumanta nga sila, kala mo chorus eh. Pakinggan niyo ang maski na yung online ng CCF, ngayon, main, parang chorus. Tapos meron silang choral group sa harap, tapos may dalawang mikrofonong malalaki sa tabi. Those mics don't work. Kasi unang-una sabi ko, ba't ganun kayo maglagay ng mikrofono? Ang layo. Tapos siya, sir, hindi naman talaga gumagana yun eh. So gaganon-ganon lang sila doon. Okay. Pero hindi gumagana. Okay, paano gagawin? Ganito. Bago mag-service, normally on a Saturday, no, magpa-practice ang banda. Magpa-practice lahat. Okay, may click track. Tak, 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 tak. So consistent. Okay? Andun yung musical director. Okay, after 8 beats, sasabihin niya gano'n, nadidinig ng mga yun, ng mga singers yun, naka-in-ears lahat sila eh. After 8 beats, we go into chorus. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, chorus. Okay? So isang track, dun sa recording, andun yung instructions nung musical director. Okay? So ang gagawin nila ngayon, they follow now the click track. Pagdating doon sa chorus, kakanta sila lahat. Second voice, third voice, fourth voice, fifth, sixth, whatever. No? Pati mga whatever. Pero wala naman ganun sa stage. Pero meron. Di ba? So magtataka ka, saan galing yun? Andun sa recording. Ngayon, pagka worship na, so sabihin ng worship team, okay gang, or okay church, sabihin niya ganun, we're about ready to do our praise and worship. Are you ready? So, yeah! Ganun. Pipindutin na nung technician yung recording. Tak, tak, 1, 2. Imbis na maggagano ng drumstick. So 1, nadidinig nila 2. 1, 2, 3, 4, chang! Umpisa na sila. Sinusundan nila yung click track na nadidinig nila dito sa in-ear. Okay? O di in-beat sila lahat. So pagdating doon sa refrain, pagkanta nila, habang kumakanta pa rin, merong sumasabay sa kanila doon sa background. Tapos, doon sa recording in itself, naglalagay sila additional guitars, additional synths, additional whatever. Ang kapal ng tulog mo. Meron ka naman click track eh. Yun ang sinasabi ko. Mahalata. Kung hindi kayo magaling. So doon nakukuha. Doon malalaman ngayon gaano kagaling yung praise and worship. Okay, that's one, no? Na ginagawa na. They're starting to do that here in the Philippines. So it's good, no? Na medyo, hindi kayo maniniwala. I had a chance of talking with the chief engineer of Joel Austin. Si di ba? Anong belief nun? Sila eh? Yung tawag nila doon? Yung kanilang belief na puro, pastor? Kay Joel Austin? Yun, prosperity gospel. Anyway, hindi yun ang pag-uusapan natin. Ang pag-uusapan natin, yung technique nila. Okay, so, yung pinapatugtog nila sa TV is actually delayed by 15 minutes. Hindi live. They have time to mix it. Not only that, they have time to replace all the mistakes. Ganito, they have your main studio in that big, big auditorium. Okay? So, i-record nila yung praise and worship nila doon and everything else and so forth and so on. Habang pagtapos na yung praise and worship, magsasalita na si Joel Austin, Sa auditorium, nagsasalita siya. Sa live, hindi pa. Kasi late ng 15 minutes eh. Yung nirecord na ngayon ng praise and worship, pupunta sa isang studio within the complex. Meron silang what they call the Nashville Singers. Itong Nashville Singers, these are the pros. These are pros, as in sight read. Talagang magagaling. Okay? They replace all the singing. Papatungan nila ng papatungan sila. Isasama ngayon yung recording. Ang laki ng tunog. Ang ganda ng tunog. Perfect. And then they broadcast it 15 minutes after. Together na with the recorded sermon of Joel Austin. Perfect. Sabi ko, isn't that, aren't you guys being late in airing? Sabi nga, what is 15 minutes? Kaba, mapapansin mo yung 15 minutes? Hindi. O nga naman. Sila multi-state eh. Kasi you have to understand that yung importante sa kanila is the TV show eh. Kasi they reach more people. Basically the same thing as when you are doing online. That's the reason why it is important for the online to be as good. Not only for your praise and worship, but the way it sounds, the way it's put together, even the camera shots, dapat pinag-aaralan eh. Hindi nakababad lang yung camera. Diba? So ang daming technique. There are a lot of ways of diba, skinning the cat, they say. Diba? Yeah.
My office is there. Pag kanina, nagpa-practice yung praise and worship, last Saturday, may counseling ako. I have to move. Malis ako dito.
Ano? Pastor?
Last week, may counseling ako dito. Nagpa-practice ang music team namin. Umalis kami kasi maingay.
Right.
Narinig ko. Now, paano kaya ang pwedeng gawin na kahit na may practice dito, hindi ko masyadong naririnig sa office ko?
Well, two things. Papalitan yung door, but normally you can't unless you buy an acoustic door, which is very expensive. In a situation like that, dinodoble ko yung door. May parang vestibule. So gagawa tayo ng parang maliit na kwarto dun sa loob before you go inside. That's one solution. That's the easiest and most economical way. Pwedeng ganon. Malakas na malakas ba?
Medyo malakas. Hindi kayo kung may kausap ka, hindi kayo magkakaintindihan naman kayo pero nakakainis.
Nakakairita. That's true. Yes. Yun, siguro let's have a look later kung paano natin gawin. Okay. Yun. Any questions so far? Saan na ba tayo? Ringing out stage monitors. Last Wednesday, kasi meron kaming practice area yung banda ko. And like I said, we had equipment and everything else. And I was trying to ring out the monitors, yung ganon, no? And one thing I've noticed, na as long as for the voice, kasi ako pag naglagay ako ng monitors kasi, hindi ko nilalagay yung mga instrumento or any. Kasi may kanya-kanya naman silang amplification. No? Ang nilalagay ko lang voice kasi importante yung blending no? Yung ganon. If you take care of your mid-frequency, somewhere around 500 and lower frequency, yun ang hahatakin mo and lalaruin mo, nawawala yung howling and nawawala yung feedback. And then pwede mo nang i-push. Yung ganon, no? But nevertheless, so that's one thing that I've noticed using equalization. Now, you can probably take a picture of this one if you want to find out how to ring out monitors, no, in a more efficient manner. But this one is, kailangan mo pa ng spectrograph, kailangan mo ng real-time analyzer, yung ganon, no? Para malaman mo kung ano yung frequency na nag-feedback tapos yun na ibababa mo. No? Those are things that can be done. Anyway, it's basta sundan lang ninyo yung nakasulat, it can be done that way. Like what I was saying, do not be afraid of the high frequencies. Kasi yung mga SS, yun ang nagbibigay ng buhay eh. Pag tinanggal mo kasi yun, magiging ganyan ang labas eh. Hindi maganda. No, magiging ngongo. And it does not give clarity. Yun yung hangin eh. Yun yung brilliance. Yun yung bigay ng clarity nung boses. Which is very important. So kung kailangan yung pihitin, there are two ways kasi of equalizing, no? It's a very long process. Yung equalization by itself, use of effects and everything else, that's one whole course in reality. I can give you just an overview, but we cannot totally discuss it. But there are two ways of equalization: deductive or additive. Deductive, normally ang ginagawa nila palagi. Which means, naka-flat response sa equalization mo and then magbabawas ka. Like yung ginawa natin kanina, nagbawas tayo sa baba, tumaas, nagkaroon ng high frequency. That's one way. Now, the other way is you add additive. Whatever works for you, works. Okay? It does not necessarily mean na pag nag-add ka, mali. Mali yun. It does not necessarily mean that way. Sa audio kasi, pag tinanong ka, ang palaging answer, it depends. Kasi it really depends on a lot of situations. Hindi gaya ng voltahe ng kuryente, na pag sinukat mo, 220, talagang 220 yan. Sa audio and acoustics and everything else, yung volume, yung quality, and all those things are actually affected by a lot of things. Humidity, temperature, noise from the outside, number of people inside, maraming factor. Kaya ang answer palagi, it depends. So sa equalization, huwag kayong matakot magdagdag o magbawas. Ang pinaka-importante, kung ano yung pinaka-magandang tunog. Again, the problem is, ano ang magandang tunog? Yun ang sinasabi ko. How do you listen for? Or what do you listen for? Yun ang sanayin nyo yung sarili nyo. One of the things kasi I've noticed, ang singing style of a lot of artists here in the Philippines, I'm not talking about churches, I'm talking more in terms of, like, for example, yung mga OPM natin. Iisang klaseng type eh. Parang Eraserheads. Hanggang ngayon, Eraserheads, 80s pa yun, hanggang ngayon, ganun pa rin yung style. There's another one. Sinong drummer dito? Drummer ka? Okay. The other thing that I've noticed about yung drum sound or the drum tone dito sa Pilipinas, yung tunog na tong, 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 tong. Hindi na natanggal-tanggal. Parang yung, ang tawag doon, yung manipis na snare. Ha? What do you call that? Yung manipis, piccolo. Parang piccolo snare. Yung gano'n na tunog. And then the other thing also, that, well, again, siguro sa akin lang yun, no? So, because everything is, it depends eh. It really depends on the preference. Ang lakas ng snare natin pag magpatunog tayo. When in the first place, yung snare sound, nag-impede yan, lumalaban sa boses ng tao. Kaya pag nilakasan mo yung snare, tapos kumakanta, lumalaban ngayon. Hindi nyo maiintindihan yung, pakinggan nyo yung mga nakalagay sa YouTube and everything else na hindi talaga recorded well. Ang hina ng boses, you have to understand that 70% of what you are supposed to be putting out into the audience, 70%. Normally it should be 60. Pero ako 70% should be the voice. The instruments are just incidentals. Wala silang pakialam. At saka you never, like for example, yung mga instrumentalists dyan, yung mga nagki-keyboard, yung mga nagigitara, you only put your fill-ins in between the vocals. You never, wag niyong pagsabayin yung vocals at saka yung gitara. Maglalaban yun eh. Importante sa ano pa naman, sa singing, is not only the melody, but also the lyrics. So, can you imagine, nilagay mo na yung snare, nilagay mo pa yung gitara, habang kumakanta ka, parang, hindi ba? Hindi tama eh. You listen to yung mga foreign mixes. You listen to the mga foreign recorded songs. Hindi sila lumalaban sa isa't isa. That's one thing. So, what do you have to listen for? Yun ang importante. Ano ang... In reality naman, walang tama, walang mali. But what works? But you just have to take into consideration that if you want your song to become popular, make sure that they are understood and they are liked by people. Example, alam nyo naman lahat ang You've Got a Friend. Alam nyo yan? Hindi. Alam nyo yan, no? Okay. Bakit sikat yung kantang yan? Kasi, by construction, unang-una, mahina siyang tumunog. Ano lang yun eh? Gitara lang yun eh. Okay, that's one. Number two, tignan nyo ha, pag kumakanta si James Taylor, when you're down, pause. And troubled, pause. And you need a helping hand, pause. Do you get it? What I'm trying to tell you is this. Yung mga pauses na yun, in between the lyrics, gives you the ability or now the time to absorb the lyrics. You get it? When you're down, ano ba sinabi niya? When you're down and troubled, si pumapasok. Anong labas? Million seller. Isa pa, alam niyo yung kanta ni Freddie Aguilar? Anak. Okay, hindi ko alam yung lyrics, pero nung isinilang ka sa buong mundo, ewan ko kung yung tatay mo, whatever, taran-daran-dan-daran-dan, pause. Did you notice it? Tapos tuloy na naman siya, tan-daran-daran, because that time, yung nagpo-pause siya habang gumagitara lang, that gives the listener the chance to absorb the song. I mean, can you imagine, kunwari, isinilang ka sa mundong ito, ano ba yan? Laking tuwa ng magulang mo. Eh, yun, hindi, wala. Gitara lang. Because that will make now the listener absorb. Di ba? Yun ang ano, yun ang mga, these are part of the secrets of songwriting. No? Okay? Nasubukan ko rin kasing mag-songwrite eh. No, I used to do a lot of jingles before. Nung araw, ang mga ginagawa ko, mga commercials sa Miguel Beer, malinaw na malinaw, Hinebra ang tunay. Yun, gawa ko yun. Ano pa ba? Mga Marlboro cigarettes nung araw. Yung San Miguel Beer, ito ang beer, lahat yun. Yung more international, ayaw ko, inabot nyo yun. More international cigarettes, inabot ba ninyo yun? Inabot mo? O yun, gawa ko yun. Ano pa ba? Ang dami pa. But anyway, pinag-aaralan ko lahat yan. I attend seminars, I confer with the songwriters, mga ganun, just to understand all these things. Then it's actually easy. No? Common sense. So the same way with how you deliver the praise and worship. Pag yung praise and worship natin ay napakalakas, nakakairita, may inis ang congregation. So dapat tama lang. Nagkakaintindihan, you are uplifting the spirit of the people, and at the same time, make them sing. Actually, that's one of the reasons why we have those. Ang pinakamalaki sa lahat nandun sa congregation. Alam niyo kung bakit? Kasi, pag kumanta ka, yung boses mo aakyat dun sa taas, or aside from going to our God, no? Pumunta rin dyan. I-reflect niya ngayon yan all over. So, ang labas niya ngayon, parang magiging chorus yung buong simbahan. Gano'n ang sistema. And at the same time, walang feedback. Kasi diffused all over the place. Gano'n ang sistema niyan. Yes? Mm. Oo nga, pero ceiling. May ceiling yon. Okay. Magsabit din kayo ng ganun. I mean, that's the most plausible way of doing things, no? Ang sistema kasi ganito eh. Contrary, again, it depends on it depends on ano eh. It depends on your design belief. Ganito yan eh. Sa ano kasi, sa acoustics, ganito yan. Meron kami tinatawag na Contra Carpet. Okay. But anyway, Contra Carpet means that if this is carpeted all the way through, that means absorptive. Okay? So yung taas, hindi ko gagawing absorption or diffusion. Kasi kailangan ko yung bounce nung ingay, kunwari, or yung sound, pupunta doon, babalik dito sa baba, a-absorbin ng carpet. But in this case, what happens is that live ito, kasi pag kinarpet ko to, pag kinarpet natin lahat yan, pag umulan, kung laking problema. Di ba? Putik dyan, putik doon. Di ba? So, I always do not recommend na sa mga churches, especially mga public places, na ika-carpet. Okay? Now, in this case, ang sistema kasi, since this is live, pagkatapos we have people, and people are absorptive elements. So we absorb. Okay? Pag diniretso mo yan, pupunta ron, babalik sa'yo rin. No? Mas maganda kung pupunta ron, kakalat niya. Kaya mayroon yan. May mga ganon. Ganito yan eh. There are two ways, no? Some elements. One is concave. Okay? Concave, as the word says, it's cave. Kung cave, pa ganun. Okay? Get it? Ngayon, yung cave na yan, yung concave na yan, familiar kayo sa ano, no? Sa, panganto, sa antena ng signal. Ano? Yung satellite. Okay. Nakaganon yun. Ganito yan. Alam niyo kung bakit? Yung antena nun nandito. Alam niyo kung bakit? Pag yung signal nagpunta ron, pupunta sa gitna. So, you never use this as part of your church ceiling. Kaya ganun tunog ng Catholic churches. Okay? Kasi akala nila nung araw, this works because nandito yung pare. So since naririnig niya yung boses niya, na sarili niya, akala niya magandang-maganda. In reality, it's not. Okay. Now, the way to do it is to use convex. What is convex? Yung kabaliktaran yan. Bakit? Pag tumama yung sound, it's diffused all over the place. And it has been proven na itong shape na ito is the most efficient. That's the reason why even the Catholic churches actually have columns na ganyan. Bilog. Di ba? Although during that time, hindi pa nila alam. Pero more or less, napansin na nila na it can work. Okay? So, if you're singing underneath that, your voice does not go back to you, but it's distributed evenly. And you have to understand that when the congregation sings and you fuse all the voices together, ang ganda ng labas. Kasi nagsasama-sama na eh. Walang separation. That's also the reason why pagdating sa equalization, yung mga nagmi-mix dyan, no? If you want the voice or anything to stick out, kung gusto nyong lumabas yung instrumento, gusto nyong lumabas yung boses, okay, you equalize. Magdagdag kayo ng high frequency, magdagdag kayo ng mga 3 kilohertz or whatever. Pero kung gusto nyong pantay-pantay sila lahat, deductive, magtanggal ng high frequency. And because of that bouncing of those convex things, napuputol yung frequency yung sinasabi ko. So nagkakaroon ngayon ng equal distribution of sound all over the hall. Yun. So, ang solusyon doon, pwede kayo magsabit ng clouds. We call them clouds. Kaya lang, there are a lot of ways of doing it. Number one, you probably have to consult a structural engineer, no? Or somebody who really understands. Kasi medyo may weight yan, mabigat. Although we've done, I've done some churches na sinabit lang namin yung ganun yung, nagsabit lang kami ng ganun. No. Although you can actually do that, mahirap na kasi pag bumagsak yan sa congregation, bagsak eh. Delikado, di ba? Oo. That's the reason why I always tell yung mga kliyente na make sure that a structural engineer is present or has the approval, has his approval para baka, di ba, yung mga nakasabit na ganyan, dapat yan talaga nakatama ang Kasi mahirap na mabagsakan. There was one instance sa Meralco pa nangyari ito. At sa bagay, yun naman, it's a weird thing kasi sumakay siya dun sa speaker eh. Binababa niya, nakasakay dun sa speaker. Nung binababa niya ganon, pagtanggal ng buckle, kumalas. Bumagsak yung speaker. Pati siya, bagsak. Patay. See, again, minsan hindi natin iisip eh. Ang safety, aspect. Ganon. Okay. Konti na lang. So, if you have questions on ringing out stage monitors, just follow this. And ito ba, kunan nyo ng picture if you wanna ringing out the system. Kasi yun ang usual problem kasi. The other thing nga pala is that there's a possibility na yung yung monitors nyo, malakas ang low frequency. Tanggalin nyo yung low frequency kung voice lang. Tanggalin yung bass. So ang lalabas doon would be yung mid-frequency lang, yung boses lang. Magkakarinigan sila. Okay. Ito yung well, this is partly acoustics already, Naman, reverberation problems. Paano ang solutions and everything else. You have your standing waves, echoes, RT60 ang tawag sa measurement na yun, Okay, now how do you tame reverberation? Now, yung quick fixes, you can actually, like for example, if you put curtains, yung mga heavy curtains, doon sa salamin, magkakaroon ng effect yan. Mas madideden. These are just remedial measures na pinakamadali na matitame mo ang reverberation, But in our case naman, hindi natin problema yon. Maglalagay ka lang ng mga curtains dyan na medyo makapal ng konti. Actually, mayroong specification 14 ounces dapat yung curtain to work perfectly. And it has to be at least about 4 inches away from the wall or from the window or whatever. Yung ganon. No? And of course, you can never use foam. Now, the reason why I do not recommend foam is because foam is very flammable. No? Madaling masunog ang I experienced that myself and I saw it right there, right in front of my eyes. When we just got our new transmitter from the States, meron kaming stasyon ng radyo noon. I don't know if you've heard of this radio station, NU 107. Wish FM ngayon, not Wish Radio, 107.5, yung ganon. We used to own that radio station. We sold it to them already. Anyway, that used to be a rock station, NU 107. Kararating lang nung aming bagong transmitter na 25 kilowatts na napakamahal. Pero it really sounded so good and everything else. But anyway, ang kwento ganito, habang ini-install ng mga engineers ko yung transmitter, no? Yung packaging nun, foam. Naiwan nila sa isang tabi. Doon sa isang tabing doon, nandun yung electric panel. Okay? During that time, umuulan, kumidlat. Meron kaming tore. Dumaan doon yung lightning. Pumasok doon sa electric panel. Tumama doon sa foam. Nagliyab yung foam. Sandali lang. Buti na lang, yung isa kong engineer, mabilis, kinuha niya yung fire extinguisher, Otherwise, wala, sunog. That's foam for you. That's the reason why although I was consultant for Uratex, kasi may mga acoustic materials sila eh. And one of the things that I've told them is that to make sure na mayroong fire retardancy yung kanilang mga produkto. It does not really give that 100% na hindi mo masusunog, but at least hindi masyadong nagliliyab. Yung ganon. Yung glass fiber, hindi mo masusunog, maski na anong gawin mo. Yung rock wool, ganon din, hindi mo rin masusunog. These are really... And again, also, yung use of glass fiber, I've experienced that myself. I made a studio sa Mailong nung araw. It's used for advertising. And nasunog lahat yung paligid niya, yung studio nakatayo. Yung tao na nagtatrabaho sila sa loob, soundproof eh. Nandun sila sa loob ng studio, hindi nila alam kung anong nangyayari sa labas, nasusunog na pala sila, nag-rappel sila, nasa second floor kasi yun eh, nag-rappel sila pupunta sa baba. Okay? Kung wala yung escape na yon, yung part na yun, na gusto nila nung una lagyan ng locker, na sabi ko, hindi, kasi sayang yung sunshine. Huwag na lang natin lagyan. Kung tinakpan namin yon, patay yung dalawa. Hindi sila nakalabas. Pero because nakalabas sila sa bintana, sugat-sugat nga yung kamay nila kasi hindi sila marunong mag-rappel eh. Sino ba naman ang marunong mag-rappel? Di ba? Unless nasa special forces ka. Di ba? But what I'm just trying to say is that this studio, transfer namin lock, stock, and barrel. Walls, ceiling, lahat ng gamit sa loob. Nilipat namin sa isang lugar. Hindi nasunog. Because two things, glass fiber at saka gypsum board ang ginamit. Yung gypsum board kasi makapal eh. 3 patong yun eh. Studio eh, recording studio. Gusto mo tahimik eh. Yung ganon. No? So never use foam. At saka isa pa, pag nasunog kasi yan, toxic. So right there and then, inhale mo yun. Tactile. Okay. Again, these are the formulas that you have to use in the calculation and everything else. And these are siguro ganito, no? Unless, of course, you want more of this kind of knowledge, I can always come back here sometime, no? Siguro the next 2 weeks or whatever, we can continue with this. Kasi there's one thing that I'd like to discuss bago tayo maghiwalay para mayroon naman kayong take home. No? Kayo, gusto nyo bumalik ako o okay pa rin ba sa inyo matuto kayo o okay na kayo? Ha? Anyway, just tell si Pastor Jimmy, no? Kung paano. And then he can always get in touch with me and then we can schedule again. Yung mga other things that we have to know. But meantime, gusto kong can we go into yung express mixing dyan? Pakitingnan na lang sa PowerPoint. Meron nakalagay express mixing. Ito, that's the reason why it's called express mixing is because pag set up nyo ng sistema, mabilis talaga. And napakadali. I've lectured this in several churches. Yung kapitbahay nyo, doon pala sila. Sa Bukawi nga pala yan. GIL, I'm not sure if nandun pa yung mga, mga volunteers na nilecturean ko noon, but I taught them this express system of mixing. For me, it works. It works, no? Kasi, madali. Again, it goes back into what do you want to listen for? Ano ang gusto niyo mapakinggan? But anyway, here it is. This is the usual house of worship system, no? That is done as a diagram for sound reinforcement. Ito yan. Sana. Oh. Okay. Human hearing. Ito, this is important. The reason why I always include this in the lecture is because we only have one system of hearing, and that's our ear. Ang problema kasi ng tenga, pag nabingi ka na, hindi po nagagamot. At saka pag mayroon kang tinnitus, it's talagang parusa. I mean, can you imagine the whole time, bago ka matulog, habang whatever you do, mayroon kang nadidinig sa tenga mo. Mga 1K, sakit sa tenga yun. I had a friend who's actually an elder in our church before, and meron siyang tinnitus. And konting angat lang ng volume, umaangal siya kasi masakit eh. Kasi natadagdagan yung kanyang sa tenga eh. Now, how do you get that? You get that by destroying your hearing. How do you destroy your hearing? Loudness. Lakas. Ang problemang malaki ngayon is a lot of, especially kids, no? They use buds. Yung headphones, not headphones, earphones. No? Yung earphones kasi diretso yan eh. Sa kanal ng tenga mo eh. No? So you're pumping in loudness in there. So after a while, yung tenga kasi natin, parang, naintindihan niya kung ano yung compression, no? Compressor. Okay? Nung araw kasi, merong baterya na ginagamit sa cellphone na pag palagi mong, I forgot the name of that battery, na palagi mong sinasaksak, wina 100%, palagi mong wina 100%, nagkakaroon ng memory. Na after a while, hindi mo na ma-charge. Kasi nagkaroon na ng memory. Ganon ang tenga natin. After a while, pag sobra na yung energy ng sound na pumapasok sa tenga natin, andun na lang yung threshold mo, hindi na bumababa. Now, what happens is that you're pumping a lot of sound into your ears, kaya nasisira. So, isa pa kasing bagay that you have to understand is that as you grow older, sa lalaki yata, if I'm not mistaken, 30 years old, once you reach 30 years old, yung high frequency nyo nagdi-diminish. Sa babae, I think it's about 45 years old. That's actually the reason why, in reality, the better sound engineers are women. Sorry ah. Anyway, okay. See, look at this. Ito yung Fletcher Munson free field equal loudness contours. Mayroon silang bagong nilabas ngayon, but it's basically almost the same thing. Look at what happens. Ang pagbasa nito baliktad. Pag ganun. Sa low frequency, sa 100 Hz down, kailangan mo ng mga 80 dB kung kunwari, let's say nakikinig ka sa 60 Hz, sa 60 Hz, okay, ang kailangan, not 60 Hz, sorry, 60 dB. Sa 60 dB, there it is, 60, can you see it? yung 60, 50, 60, no? Pag trinace mo yun all the way up, sa mga 100 hertz, ang kailangan mo is about 60 dB para marinig mo yung bass ng 100 hertz sa 60 dB. Pero pagdating sa 10K, look at what happens. Sa 60, umakyat dun sa taas, bigla bumaba. Pansin nyo? That's how the ear actually listens to. That is the response of the ear. The reason behind that is because yung response ng ating tenga is really tuned. God made it in such a way that it is tuned to speech intelligibility para makapag-usap tayo at magkakaintindihan. That's the reason why it was done that way. Okay? So, yan ang sistema. And if you notice, if you are pumping in 100 dB, pag sa 100 hertz, ang mangyayari, ang kailangan mo, you need about 115 dB. No? Doon. So, if you notice, yung curve niya, almost nagpa-flat siya doon sa itaas compared doon sa 60 dB. Yung 60 dB may curve pa eh. Yung 100 dB, maliit na lang yung curve. Kasi habang lumalakas, yung naririnig ng tao, yun ang tinatawag nilang natutulig ka. Hindi mo na maintindihan kung ano yung... Kasi nag-equal na sila, kaya it's called equal contour curves. Nawawala na ngayon yung intelligibility factor. When at 60 dB, mas malinaw compared dun sa 100 dB. You get it? Okay. So, that is how our ear is supposed to respond to sound, specifically to voice. Kasi, ang buhay natin nasa boses. Okay? Ito yung ating human hearing. Yung ear, auditory canal, yung stirrup, yun yung eardrum. Ang problemang masisira, nakikita nyo yung may tatlo, hindi ba parang snail na ganun? Yung cochlea. Tapos may tatlo dun. Yung maliliit na, kasi hindi po pwede hindi niya kaya. But anyway, yung nakita nyo yung tatlo, yung yellow, di ba? Yung auditory nerve, tapos mayroong those are actually your parang hair inside the ear. Pag nabali yan, that's it. Bingi ka na. Yun ang problema. So can you imagine kung magta-transplant sila ng hair nung iyong sa auditory nerve mo, ikakabit nila yung hair na yon para makarinig ka uli. Two things, bubuksan yung tenga mo. Bubuksan yung brain. Bubuksan lahat yan. Second, napakamahal yan. So, what do? We preserve our hearing. Now, how do you preserve your hearing? First and foremost, as much as you can, play your music as low as it can be. It's better to use headphones compared to earphones. Yung earphones kasi mismong kanal ang tinatahak mo eh. Yung headphones, mayroon pang hangin in between. So may buffer. Okay? Number 2, huwag mong lakasan. Pag kunwari, magkatabi kayong ganun, pag narinig mo yung pinapakinggan niya, it's too loud. Ganun ang sistema nun. Dapat it has to be toned down. See, once you lose your hearing, that's it. Hindi ko kayo tinatakot or anything like that, but it's one of the hardest things that is so hard to happen. You imagine, nanonood ka ng sine, pag tapos sinabi. See? Kasi, unang-una, malabo na yung pagkasabi niya. Secondly, mahina pa yung tenga mo. Nangyayari na sa akin yun. Well, probably because of my exposure also, and then now the best thing to do if you can preserve your hearing aside from making use of those, no? May nabibili sa Ace Hardware na parang foam na kulay yellow. Na parang nilalagay sa tenga na namamaffle yung tunog. That helps out in preserving your ear. In other words, pag nagmimix ka, tanggalin mo, Pag tapos na, pag kunwari pitik-pitik na lang and everything else, okay, muli. That helps. The other thing is there are some construction type headphones, actually ginagamit din nila yun sa firing range, that you can actually wear just to preserve your hearing. I mean, it's better to be very careful about things. Mahirap na eh. Sayang lang. Especially if you are into music ministry, you are into audio and everything else, it's better to really take care of your hearing. So anyway, yung pina, yung ear flap na yan, kaya mayroon yan eh, kasi yan ang humihigop ng sound. Kaya ano yan eh, directional eh. Pag ginanon mo, pwede mong alamin eh kung saan nanggagaling yung tunog eh. Okay? Tapos papasok dun sa loob, and then it goes into your auditory nerves, and then to the brain. Okay? And then the brain interprets it. Kung ano yung action na gagawin mo. Okay? Yung brain kasi natin, yan ang magic computer. Siya yung nagkukontrol sa lahat. That's one. Number two, ang noise can actually affect your health. Pwede kang magkaroon ng heart attack because of that. Ang noise kasi is a very deterrent, no? For good health. Kaya, di ba, pag kunwari nagpunta kayo sa bukid, all of a sudden, maririnig lang ninyo mga ibon and, tahimik and everything else, parang ang laking diferensya eh. As compared to nandun kayo sa Maynila. Di ba? Ang laking diferensya. Kasi, mahina yung pandinig nyo. O yung na-experience nyo as. So, take care of your hearing. That's very important. Okay, ito yung, see, look at military jet para 130. Sandali ha, excuse me. Okay. See, ang normal speech is about 60 dB. Ang loudness factor nun is 4 times as loud. Okay? Yung noisy restaurant is about 70 dB, sometimes 80 dB, depends really. And you have a problem with using the telephone. Construction site is about 80 dB, pero yung noisy restaurant, minsan mga 80 dB yan eh. Umaabot, no? Especially now, medyo nagbago na eh. So, yung jet takeoff at 500 meters, about 100 dB. So, can you imagine if, let's say, the tech guy measures it and he's listening at 100 dB, I mean, can you imagine what kind of output these loudspeakers are coming out? So, hindi na masarap pakinggan. So, temper. So, normally, the way it should have been is that in the middle of the room, it should be about 80, 85 dB. Depende. Okay? Ang soft whisper is about 10 dB. See, amplified rock music is 110 to 115. That's 128 times as loud. Ang reference level natin is yung kitchen bathroom, which is about 40 dB, reference level, no? So 128 times nun, it can already cause damage. In 15 minutes. 15 minutes. Imagine. That's the reason why ang OSHA, that's the, ano pa nga to? Occupational Safety and Health Administration sa Amerika, and it's also being used by other countries. Ang sinasabi nila, mayroong manner of exposure dapat tayo sa mga loud sounds. Alam ko kung nandito yun. I'm not sure. Yes, hindi pala eh. Okay. So recommended SPL should be about 75 to about 95 dBA. Pag na-expose ka sa sound na 100 dB, ang maximum exposure mo should be 2 hours. Aside from that, dapat magpahinga ka na. Kasi kundi masisira ang tenga mo. Kung sa disco ka nagtatrabaho, and 115 dB ang pinuput out ng loudspeakers nyo, ayan. 15 minutes dapat maalis ka na. Because beyond that, talagang masisira yung tenga mo. Okay? All right, now here we go. So okay na kayo, no? So hearing, preserve your hearing. That's the important thing. Now, how do you now do your express mixing? Hindi ko idea ito, no? I got this from another guy, and it works. I mean, for me, it works. Sinubukan ko na. I've taught it to other people. It works also as well. So how do you do it? Papaluin niyo yung drummer. Acoustic drums do, no? Okay? So, papalo yung drummer. See, gagawa siya ng beat. Walang amplification whatsoever. Hindi naka-on ng mga PA and everything else. And then, after what, so, see, ang sabi kasi nito, a drummer has an acoustic, very loud instrument that does not have a volume pot anywhere. In other words, hindi mo mapuput down yung volume. Kasi, ganun talaga yung palo niya eh. May mga malalakas pumalo. Although, nowadays, I've noticed that in a lot of mga releases nila, yung mga banda-banda ngayon, na nagpo-post sa YouTube, minsan nagre-record sila, sabay-sabay sila in the room. And balance eh. Pati yung drums, ni walang shield, no nothing whatsoever. But that's the way they used to record before. That's the way the Beatles recorded nung araw. Hindi nakatago si Ringo. They are in there also, together with the rest of the band. Now, the reason why it works that way is because you're supposed to be a band eh. You're supposed to be together. So dapat, nagkakakitaan lang kayo, alam niyo na kung ano yung susunod. No? Kasi that's part of artistry. That's part of the craft that you do. Ang hirap kasi yung, well, nung araw, nung 70s, bandang 80s, nauso yung multi-tracking and separate ang tracks ng bawat isa. No? Mas mahirap gawin because, again, wala kang kaharap na kabanda eh. Yung album ni Bamboo, are you familiar with Bamboo? Yung, ano ba yung kanta ni Bamboo, ano sikat na sikat niya? Ano pangalan nun? Basta yung sikat niya. Anyway, most of the recordings of Bamboo were recorded in my studio. As a matter of fact, I still have the master tapes eh. Yung kantang yun, nirecord yun live. Sabay-sabay sila. Si Bamboo, yung gitarista at saka yung keyboard, nasa loob sila ng control room. Si Bamboo nakaupo harap ng mixing board. Tapos yung engineer ko, si Angie Rosul. Tapos drummer sa loob ng studio at saka sa kabila yung bahista. Okay? Tinugtog nila yon. Nung tinugtog nila, binuo yung kanta, sabay-sabay sila at the same time. Nung ginawa nila nung binulti-track nila, ang pangit ng labas. So ang nirelease nila, yung recorded live. Did it work? Yes. Iba kasi pag when you're doing everything live as compared to yung multi-track, masyadong clinical yung multi-track. Ita-track mo bawat isa. But the secret there is that sabay-sabay kayo, pagkatapos kung ano yung masamang part, yun ang tatakpan, yun ang ipapunch in. Tatakpan o papalitan or whatever. No? Ganun ang sistema. But the basic rhythm, saka yung basic feel ng kanta, andun pa rin. Okay? So yung drummer starts doing the beat. Okay. Pagkatapos nun, after he has played for half a minute or so mayroon tayong stable reference. Alam na natin yung volume eh. So yung engineer, bababa, titignan niya, papakinggan niya mabuti, okay, balanse ba? Balanse, okay. patutugtugin niya ngayon yung bahista na naka-amplifier lang nung sarili niya. Okay? Look what happens. Not amplifying him yet. His volume is raised and lowered until we have a solid, even bass coming from the stage. So in other words, dapat yung ganito kasi yan sa drums kasi, again, it depends on how you treat yung drums at saka bass combination. You can make the kick higher and then the bass, your bass. What does it mean? What it means is that yung plug, ganun niya, kukunin nung kick. Pero yung kukunin nung bass. Ako nyo? So, plug, so yung solid. Okay? So, yung kick mo, tatanggalin mo yung bass portion. Kasi ang gagawa ng bass portion, yung baho. Pag sasamahin mo ngayon yung dalawa, yung kick at saka yung bass, hanggang makuha mo yung timpla na halos iisa sila. Bass at saka yung kick. Okay? You can try that. You can try it. Magugulat kayo. Okay? Without doing anything, ha? Yun lang, papakinggan lang ninyo yung bahista at saka yung kick. So, ganun yung kick. Gaganon yung bass. Pag pinagsama mo yun, solid. Doon mo makukuha yung mga ganun na tunog. Iko-compress mo ngayon yung kick ng konti para iisa ang tunog niya, solid. Sino yung mga nagmi-mix dito? Nakukuha niyo yung technique? No? Okay? Or, you can do it the other way around. Yung bass, yun ang kukuha ng bang, ganon. Pero yung kick naman. So, it depends on what you like. Pero ang importante, mag-asawa. Ang tawag namin doon, mag-asawa. Pareho sila. Parehong-pareho. Yung kick at saka yung bass. Okay? So, okay na tayo doon. So, ang ganda na ng tunog. Okay. So, pumapalo siya. Tug, tak, tug, pak, bug. Solid yung bug, tak, bug. Kasi sumusunod din. Yung kick kasi downbeat yan Bug. Yung bug niya, that's downbeat Bug. Yung snare is your upbeat, no? That's yung downbeat mo. Pagkatapos, yung first quarter mo is your, is your snare Siya, plug, pak, plug, pak, plug, tak, plug, pak. See? Puro quarters yung yung snare mo Okay? Ngayon, at the same time, itotono mo yung snare in such a way that it cracks but it is not annoying. So how do you do that? Unang-una, the placement of the microphone is very important. Hindi lang turo ng turo. No? Kung kunwari, that's also the reason why, in my case, what I do is I never really put other mics except 3. Kick, snare, no? At saka overhead. Or, overhead, at saka kick. Kasi yung overhead mo takes care of the entire kit. And your snare is part of the kit. Pag gusto mo lang na mangibabaw ng konti, yung snare, lalagyan mo ng mikrofono. Okay? And yung placement mo ng mikrofono should be done in such a way that it is solid enough. What do I mean by that? Well, the microphone, again, it depends on your choice of mic. So, depende yan. Let's say, SM57 ang gagamitin mo, or the Sennheiser ones, or whatever cardioid microphone, dynamic microphone you want to use. Okay? In my case, what I do is tinatanggal ko yung highs ng snare. Enough na hindi siya sasapaw sa boses ng tao. So you just have to imagine kung saang frequency ang pwedeng sapawan ng crack ng snare dun sa boses ng tao. And then, slowly you put it down. Okay? So, imagination yon kasi wala ka naman kumakanta Alright? So, kung 3 lang yung mikrofono mo, sa kick, titimplahin mo yon in such a way na mag-asawa dun sa bass, yung snare mo, in such a way that there's a crack in it that gives you that fourth beat. Kaya lang, hindi sumasapaw doon naman sa vocals, which is your main thing. Okay? Your overhead takes care of your cymbals and everything else. You have to understand that the cymbals are very loud. Hindi mo kailangan lagyan yung mikrofono. It's the same thing as using alam niyo yung triangle? Yung triangle, nakakita na ba kayo nun? Alam niyo yun? Yung triangulo, yung pinapalong, ting, ganun. Walang mikrofono yun, pero maski nag-aano ka kalayo, pag pinindot mo ngayon, pang, abot yun, gandun sa dulo. Napakalakas. Cymbals are basically of the same characteristics as a triangle. More or less nandun sa, sa frequency yun. Okay? So bakit kakailanganin mo pa ng lagyan ng you're not individually miking them anyway. Alright? So, that takes care of it. Susunod, we add the rhythm, the melody instruments, rhythm guitar, keyboards, horns, violins, whatever. Set its volume so it's level with the others playing, no? If any instrument disappears, one instrument is playing too loud. So ipapantay niyo yun isa-isa. But make sure, walang amplification pa yan, nadidinig niyo yun as parang acoustic lang. So yung gitara mo, kunwari naka-electric guitar ka, dapat pantay dun sa other instruments in such a way that it does not really kick out, but it stays there and you can hear it. Okay? Wala tayong sound reinforcement. Lahat is done in the stage acoustically. So, yung keyboard, dapat yung volume ng keyboard should be the same as the volume of the guitar or yung acoustic guitar. Pantay-pantay dapat. See, this secret is more on balancing, which is very important. The secret kasi in mixing is not equalization, is not putting effects, is not whatever. The secret is really more in terms of balance. Pag nabalanse mo ng tama, okay na. Now, the other factors, like for example, effects, equalization, etc., ginagamit lang yun kung gusto mong mag-stand out. Like for example, gusto mo mag-stand out yung gitara. Kasi susolo siya. So lagyan mo siya ng mid-frequency. 3K siguro, 4K. Diba? Aangat yun, lalabas. Pero if you want all of them to be balanced, zero equalization. Kung gusto mong lumayo yung instrumento, like for example, yung rhythm guitar, you add reverb. Contrary to what people believe in. When you add reverb, lumalayo. Kung gusto mo yung boses in your face, tanggalan mo na reverb. In your face yun. Kasi wala reflection eh. Okay? So you use reverb kung gusto mong lumayo or gusto mong lumapit. Okay? And then, yung compression, you use that naman to balance it off so that walang lalampas, walang masyadong soft. It has to be within the framework of your balance. And then what else? O yung mga other things like, for example, the other effects that you have to use. They are used to widen. Equalization is used for widening. Pag tinanggal mo pag dinagdagan mo ng high frequency, lumalapad eh. Pag tinanggal mo ng high frequency, lumiliit. So those are things that you have to understand what to listen for. Okay? Okay. So if any instrument disappears, there is something in there that is playing too loud. Sumasapaw. Now, kung naayos mo na yon, see, they could be properly heard before. Up to now, wala pang PA. And then, the next step, pag nabalanse mo na, pinakinggan nyo, balanse na to, okay, maganda na yung tunog ng gitara, maganda na lahat, etc., etc. Tabura, kulang ng kalansing, masyadong muddy yung gitara, then you EQ. You either pipindutin nyo yung high-pass filter or magbabawas ka ng low frequency. Doon mo gagamitin yung equalization. Hindi yung, again, ang practice is isa-isa. Like for example, yung kick, sige, kick muna tayo. Bug, 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 bug. So ikaw naman, pihit na ganun, no? See, in the first place, if the drum kit is tuned properly, you don't need to equalize it. Kasi dapat tama ang tunog tama ang tono. Alam nyo naman yun, no? Ang drum kit may tono. It's the same thing with guitars. It's the same thing, well, yung synthesizer talagang SOP yun, no? Electronic May mga tono yan. So kung maganda, tama yung tunog na, why equalize? What for? Unless gusto mong lumapit, gusto mong whatever. Gusto mong mas bassy, gusto mong mag-blend. See, again, it goes back into what I was saying earlier, no? If you want to blend, magtanggal ng high frequency. If you want it to stand out, then you add highs or probably mids. Okay? All right. So, silent pa rin yung PA natin. Ngayon, we add a guitar god. So, solo siya, pag-gitarahin nyo, lahat na ng gusto nyo gawin. Okay. It's very difficult to control him after all the guitar amps sound good when going full blast. So, above suggestion of limiting him to a 15-watter. Huwag yung stock. Kwento. Meron I was consulting this church sa May Malate. May stage din sila. Yung stage nila mataas 1 meter high. This is less than 1 meter, I think. No? Pero mataas. Basta mataas yung stage nila. Tapos yung gitarista, nandyan yung kanyang amp. It's a half stack. Alam niyo yung half stack, no? It's a Marshall half stack. Tapos nakatodo. Sa buong simbahan, walang narinig kundi yung gitara niya. Unang-una nandyan, nakaharap sa audience, dire-diretso, kayong nakaupo, sa tenga nyo dadaan. Di ba? Nakaharap dyan ayaw pa awat. So sabi ng pastor, Mike, paano ba natin isi-resolve yun? Sabi ko, ipag-pray na lang natin. Na dapat matauhan. So alam niyo kung paano ginawa? Well, unang-una, kanya kasi yung amplifier Okay? So, ang pinagawa ko, pinabaliktad ko lahat ng amp. Yung mga speakers sila nakaturo sa likod. Tumahimik. Puro low frequency ngayon pumupunta ron. At least, na-control mo yung ingay. Or you put them in front. Here, ang pangit lang kasi nasa harap nyo yung amplifier nyo. No? But the way to do it is you control the volume. Okay? So here, it says, what is important is that you control the sound in such a way na dapat tamang-tama lang siya. Kasi supposedly, ang guitar god o lead guitar player, supposedly hindi siya nagre-rhythm Sino mga gitarista rito? Wala? Ikaw gitarista? Okay. Ang sistema kasi niyan, dapat ang control mo volume. Pag nagsusolo, dolo, no? Or kunwari strat ang hawak mo, dapat ibababa mo para bridge ang para mas matinis ang labas. Then you do your solo. But if you're going to be doing rhythm, dapat yun babawas ka ng volume. Pagkatapos, more often than not, what I do is that I put yung aking neck pickup. Kasi yung mga gitara ko are done in such a way na yung neck pickup nakababa ng konti compared sa aking bridge. Again, that's my personal way of doing things. So pag nagre-rhythm lang ako, I use that configuration. And I don't strum. No? Habang nagli-lead. Ang ginagawa ko, chords lang. No? Ang sistema. So, ganun-ganun ka lang. Singit-singit lang. Ganon. Kasi meron naman nagre-rhythm Yan ang nagiging problema. 3 kayong gitarista, lahat nasa A. Iisa ang tinitipa. Yung keyboard nasa A din. O di isang tunog, isang frequency range. Dapat, kung tatlo kayong gitarista, yung isa nandito sa baba, na A. Yung isa nasa gitna, yung isa nandun sa taas. Or anywhere. So, dapat, para mas malaki yung tunog, nagkakaroon ng complement. Hindi yung isang, let's say, naka-C kayo, C dito, lahat C, pati yung organista or yung synthesizer, C nandun din sa pianista, ganun din. O di, isang tunog nyo. Ang kapal sa tunog, pero hindi tama. No? So, again, pag-usapan nyo as worship team kung paano. So, it's important that you have some sort of a worship leader who really understands instrumentation. At saka, in reality, ang songs, mayroong areglo yan may build-up. Diba? If you notice, diba? Pag pinakinggan niyo yung mga kanta, hindi naman lahat from the very start may orchestra all the way to the end. Minsan napuputol, minsan part na ito, wala yung horns, pagdating dito sa part na ito, wala yung gitara, tapos biglang sisingit na lang yung di ba? Yung ganun, that's arrangement. The same way when you do your vocals. Di ba? Okay, so, control. All right. Only now that you have a good natural mix on stage, where everybody hears everything, both on stage and at the same table at the audience, you start opening up your faders one by one. The aim is, I can find the word, so far we already have sound coming from the stage. With closed eyes, we can easily point a finger at each individual instrument. Each sound good, but narrow. In other words, what he's trying to say is that by the position of the people playing, alam mo na ang tunog na nila sa stage pa lang, stereo. You get it? Hindi mono. Kasi, when you close your eyes, you know that the guitar player is right there. Kasi doon mo nadidinig eh. You know that the bass guitar player is right here. Okay. The conga player is right there. Etc. Kasi natural ang nadidinig niyo, natural. So, yung PA, pang-accent na lang para maintindihan. Okay? So, each one is supposed to sound good. Yan ang importante. And balanse. And then, dahan-dahan mong itataas yung mga mics mo hanggang makuha mo yung correct balance o perfect balance na hanggang doon sa likod, dinig. Okay. And then, yun na nga. I start raising that fader, so at a certain point, the sound starts to widen. Kasi ngayon, kasi lumalabas ka na sa sa loudspeakers So, nagwa-widen na yung tunog. Pero balanse pa rin niya sa stage mo. Okay? Do you get, can you imagine how things are supposed to be done? All right? See, it's, yung sound coming from the stage edges where the PA boxes are, kasi normally, yung mga maliliit na dyan mo nilalagay yung mga PA no, sa tabi, no? They're matched already together with the sound of the stage. And then, balance is important. Now we have a balanced, controlled mix. In other words, ang sabi niya gano'n, fix it on stage first before fixing it in the mix. That doesn't happen. You fix in the mix, that's not true. I've been recording for the past, I started in 1967. I've been mixing and listening to music for, 50 years? More, actually. 54. So I've been involved in all these things. Inabot ko pa yung mga plakang ganyang kalalaki. Inabot ko yung nagre-record kami sa plaka. Merong cutter na ginagamit. Yun ang recording medium namin. See? So, for me, the nuances are very important, no? Although, sometimes kasi, may mga nuances na forgivable eh. Pwede mong okay na lang kasi pinapaganda naman niya yung tunog eh. Maski na out of tune ng konti. Kasi you have to understand that once, ganito yan. When I used to do a lot of jingles before, I only have 4, minsan 3 or 4 singers. Now, not all the singers that I have, well, they sing perfectly. But it does not necessarily mean that during takes, yung boses nila palaging nasa tonong eksakto. Okay? Ito ang trick na natutunan ko sa Amerika. I-record ko yung mga singers. Okay, so isang pasada. Next pasada, i-record ko ulit. Same voicing. Pangatlong pasada, same ulit. I-record ko ulit. Kung mayroong mga mistakes sa first or second, pag ipinatong mo na yung third na patong sa recording, nawawala yun. Alam niyo kung bakit? Nagpapatong-patong na yung mga ng mga rays ng mga sound rays, no? Mga waves. Pag nagpatong-patong na, nagtatakipan na bawat isa. So, yung wala sa tono, nagiging nasa tono. Kaya, magugulat ka eh. Oh, galing yung kumanta. Yung pala, hindi. Technique. So, the same thing with what I was talking about earlier, yung technique na nire-record nila yung background. So, maski na sa stage, wala sila sa tono, since napakarami nilang kumakanta, as if lahat sila nasa tono. Kasi sense na lang yan eh. Hindi na eksaktong full note eh. Or half note, or whatever, di ba? O quarter note, or whatever. Ano na eh. Maliliit na lang sense eh. Hindi mo na, you can't really distinguish. Yung pagka-flat niya o pagka-sharp niya, hindi mo na eh. Madidistinguish mo lang yon sa mga talagang perfect tone ang boses nila. Yung alam mong nasa tono yung pagkumanta. An example is Lea Salonga, no? Yun, eksakto talaga. Pag kumanta yun, note. Hindi mo masasabing wala ka sa tono. Anyway, okay. So, asan tayo? So, fix it on stage first. Balance the instruments, and then you put in. And then, vocal mics. Ang sistema niyan, one by one. Much easier to get a good vocal sound if the band already sounds good and controlled, and all of it level matched to the loudest instrument, the drums. Voice by itself should be able to reach a perceived volume level as loud as the rest of the instruments to sound like a record. Ayan. If you can't, you need more PA. But for the voice, not for the instruments. So, in your worship, in your praise and worship performance in your church, the most important aspect is the singing. Ang importante kasi sa singing, nagkakarinigan kayo. Not through the loudspeaker. Nagkakarinigan kayo dapat, bawat isa. Here's another example. Bakit ang Beatles, 2 lang ang mikrofono, 3 silang kumakanta? Naisip na ba ninyo yan? Bakit? Kasi, pag si John Lennon kumakanta, kanya ang solo mic. Pag si George at saka si Paul ang kumakanta, they share one mic. What happens? The mic is here. So, pagkanta nila, mababa na sila because isang microphone lang ang ginagamit nila, nagsishare sila eh. Pwede naman sa kanilang, bigyan kita ng isang mikrofono. What am I trying to say here? What I'm trying to say is that it does not necessarily mean that each of the singers is given a microphone. Kasi the more mics you have, the more problems you have. Because sasabihin ng isang singer, yung boses ko hindi narinig sa monitor. Diba? Sabihin ng isa, hindi, dapat mas malakas yung boses ko. Ang mangyayari ngayon, since gusto niya marinig yung boses niya, ilalapit niya ngayon yung mikropono niya. Kakanta siya ng napakalakas. Since wala siya sa tono, sira lahat. That's also the reason why choral groups are never given one microphone each. Magbibidahan eh. Di ba? Di pa pwede. Kaya dapat, dalawang nakasabit lang sa itaas. Sa Union Church, ganun ang ginawa namin. Naglagay kami ng dalawang mikropono sa itaas. And that's how they sing. Okay? So, by themselves, by the choral groups, habang kumakanta sila, nagkakarinigan sila. They don't need to balance themselves using the monitor speakers or your earphone. Hindi natural eh. Di ba? So, yun ang sistema nun. Everything in reality has a reason. I once watched a concert. They had 50 members of the choir. 50 rin yung mikrofono. Diyos ko. Alam nyo, yung buong show, feedback. Kung nagsabi, see, the thing is, if you're miking a choral group, which is another seminar, yung miking techniques ng bawat, let's say, choral group, banda, how to mic drum set, how to mic, let's say, an amplifier, etc., etc. See, ang difference kasi, no, is that the more mics you have, the more problems you're going to get. Okay? So the less microphones you have, the better. Kasi lesser ang control mo eh. So, if like for example, if your drum kit, you only have 3 microphones, di 3 lang yung pinipihit nyo. Tapos ilalagay nyo sa group na isa, o di okay na yun. So, pag gusto man napakalakas yung nung drums, baba mo nyo lang yung group fader. O di tapos. Like I said, yung mga naglalagay ng, actually normally it should be 12 microphones kung tutusin. Kung mamikin nyo yung bawat. See, the thing there that people do not totally understand is the fact that the kit in itself, that's the reason why it's called drum kit. Kasi the drum kit is one instrument. So why do you have to divide it? I was watching a video on YouTube. This guy naman was trying to mic his amplifier. 3 mikrofono. Meron pang stereo mic na ginamit. How can you make a single speaker in stereo? Eh nakatutok doon sa speaker. There's no way you can make that. Unless ilayo mo para makuha mo yung ambience ng hall. See, common sense. Diba? Tapos ang sabi pa niya, wow, ang ganda-ganda. Okay, fine. Pinakinggan ko, basag. Diba? Although distorted talaga yung gitara niya kasi nilagyan niya ng distortion eh. Pero, I mean, for me, parang sayang. Why? What for? Diba? Okay. Now for the voice. All right. See, you can actually do all these things in 4 to 5 minutes if you know what to listen for. Okay? Yeah, see, manual pay. Okay, so yun. Okay, just to recap the process of mixing, you balance the sound of all the instruments on stage. And the sound reinforcement is still silent. Okay, yun ang pinaka-importante sa lahat. And then after which, you get the natural mix on stage, and then you start opening the faders until it widens. Nagkakaroon na ng volume. Nadidinig na ninyo. And always remember that the star of the show is the vocals. But if your praise and worship vocalists are all out of tune, wala tayong magagawa ron. It's really going to be a disaster. Diba? Kailangan nila ng vocal training. Kasi the reason why you have all these 9 people in front, they're supposed to be doing voices. Each one is supposed to sing a particular part of the line of the song. Now, if everybody is doing iisa monotone o iisang nota, pakantahin na lang yung congregation. Diba? Kasi yung nasa background, supposedly sila yung magbibigay ng color dun sa pagkanta eh. That's why it's important that the vocalists should be training themselves. At saka dapat nasa tono. Nasa beat, marunong mag-second voice, marunong mag-third voice. Magkakaiba yan eh. Hindi lang ganun eh. No? Okay? And then, yon. Reset all mixer settings to 0, add amplification, listen well, anong instrumento na dapat bigyan ng konting attention para lumabas or whatever. And then, kung medyo sinisipag kayo, you can always try the one that I told you about recording parts. Tapos, ang pinapakinggan, kasi in-ear ang pinapakinggan ng mga singers, nandun yung counting ng tak, 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 tapos nandun yung instruction ng MD. Kakanta na tayo. Ito na yung chorus. Yun nadidinig nila. Sila na nakakarinig nun eh. Okay? So, ito na yung chorus. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. Kanta. Di sabay-sabay, ganun din. Kasi lahat kayo na napapakinggan nyo eh. Does it work? Yes. Makinig kayo sa sa online ng CCF. Ang kapal ng tunog nila. I'm not saying that they're good or whatever, but at least they work. To a certain extent. So there are techniques and there are ways of doing things. And one of them is that. Okay. Ang importante, it has to sound like a record. Yun ang ating objective. If you can make your mix sound like the record, that is it. That's one. What about the pastor? Kasi nakakalimutan natin yung pastor eh. Ang importante sa pastor, yung boses niya, dapat kunwari nag-uusap lang kayo face to face. Ganon ang dating. Kasi pag gumamit ka na ng mikropono, gumamit ka na ng PA, parang sumisigaw na yan eh. Pero kung kontrolado mo yung volume ng pastor, parang kayong dalawa lang ang nag-uusap, personal. Yan ganda ng labas. You get it? Okay, so, use them only for voice unless necessary. Put just enough volume so that the vocalists can hear themselves. If you are not able to achieve yung balance na yan, then you start all over again. Okay? Any questions? Tomorrow, Sunday, you can always try it. Maski na papitik-pitik lang muna, dahan-dahan, until you master it. Meron pa ba? Ayan, questions? Any question? Okay na? Good na kayo? Good na kayo? Yes. Okay, threshold basically means yung threshold, isa-set mo yung threshold, let's say 4:1. Kunwari ganon, yung settings mo. Ibig sabihin nun, for every 4 na akyat ng sound, ang ilalabas lang ng compression is 1 dB. Yun ang ibig sabihin nun. In my experience, ang normal na okay lang, na pwede mo mapaglaruan, is within 4:1. you start with 4:1 threshold. For every 4 dB, ang ilalabas mo, 1 dB lang sa PA. Yun ang ibig sabihin nun. Pag more than that, pag doble, let's say, naging 8 dB yung pumasok, ang ilalabas mo 2 dB. Kasi 4:1 ratio eh. Okay? So, normally, maglalaro ka doon. Tignan mo sa 4:1, 3:1, tignan mo kung ano yung... Ang importante kasi, when you're using compression, hindi humihinga. Hindi... mga ganon. Dapat wala yan. Dapat natural. Okay. Now, kung gusto mong mas mahaba, ang attack mo, ang decay, ang tawag doon, sa isa? Ha? No, not gain. Yung release. Ang release mo, mas mahaba. Like, for example, sa mga slow songs. Kung kunwari, ballad yung kinakanta, and gusto mo i-compress yung bass, which normally you should. The bass guitar should be given compression. Ilalagay mo yon sa slow, no? Ang release. So yung bung gano'n yung mas mahaba, bung pantay na pantay yan. So it really depends on what kind of music you are trying to reproduce. But for threshold purposes, you can always start off with something like 4:1. Parang ganon. No? That means kasi that at 4 dB, yung ganon na, that's the only time that the compressor actually kicks. And for every 4 dB, ang ilalabas niya 1 dB. Yun ang ibig sabihin nun. Okay? Any other questions? Yes. Digital. Alin, which one? Well, ganito yan, ano? The difference between analog and digital, analog kasi is the real sound. Digital is a representation of the real sound. Because your sound coming from digital is 1 and 0. So it's not music. It's not sound wave, it's not sound ray. No? Iba na yun. It's a representation. Kaya pag pinapalo mo yung ballistics o yung metro ng digital beyond 0, iba kasi your VU meter sa digital is different from the VU of analog, no? Pag lumampas ka ng 0 level, 0, that means distortion level na yun. So dapat maglaro ka dun. 0 down. Normally, if you can keep your volume level to about -12 hanggang siguro maximum -8, then you're okay. No? Sa digital. Sa analog, the difference is that the meters are calibrated with an additional 3 dB. Kaya maski na ilampas mong ganun, pag maski na hot, no? Okay lang. But that is only true, in my experience, that's only true when you're using tape. When you're recording, let's say, music, and you're recording it on tape. So maski na lumampas yung metro plus 3 dB dun sa metro mo, the hotter it is, mas maganda yung crack. Kasi nag-a-add siya ng distortion eh. Kasi you have to understand that when you add dB beyond the 0 point of your VU, no? Nagkakaroon na ng distortion yan. Kaya if you maintain it, let's say plus 2 dB, plus 3 dB, o maski na plus 1 dB, yung ganon, you'll be okay. Yun ang difference between analog and digital. Now, again, it depends on what kind of equipment you're using. Of course, you get what you pay for. The more expensive, let's say, digital recorders, di ba, the better they perform. But usually, if you maintain your volume within, let's say, mga ganun, mga minus 12, o maximum nga ng minus 8, ganun, you're gonna be okay. Yes? Sa meter. Oo. Normally, yung fader is, yung, di ba, yung may mga gatla sa ano, ang nakalagay, yung zero doon is your unity gain. Minsan, U ang nakalagay doon eh. No, that's more or less to guide you kung nasaan ka. But your final guidance in terms of what's coming out of your mixer will be your meter. But again, there are instances also, mali yung metro. Kasi ano lang yun, representation lang yun eh, ballistics lang yun eh, hindi naman totoong ano yun eh. So, titignan mo rin, titingahin mo, pag maglalaro ka, minus 12, minus 8, or whatever. Depende, yung ganon. Okay? Any more? Yes. Ano, yung? Gate. Okay, ganito yan. Ang gate is the kabaliktaran ng compression. Ang gate nagsasara. So palagyan natin yung snare, no? Nilagyan mo ng gate. Pagkatapos mo pag pinalo mo, mayroong threshold 'yon, di ba? Yung signal papasok, bubuksan niya yung gate. Pag natapos na at a certain point nung threshold, sasara yung gate. Kabaliktaran 'yun nung compression. So ang gate pang silence. Ang compression, panghaba. Yun ang difference ng dalawa. But it does not necessarily mean that you cannot use any of them for artistic purposes. Nasa yun na yun. No? But of course, again, for church purposes, another example for gate. Ito, pinapagawa ko sa CCF. Kasi, pagdating sa online, pag nagpalakpakan yung mga tao, hindi mo naririnig sa online eh. Or may say, nag-joke yung pastor, tapos nagtawanan sila. Tumatawa, nakikita mo, nakikita mo sa video na tumatawa sila pero walang sound. Paano ngayon yun? So, the way it should be is that there should be microphones na nakaturo sa audience to pick up yung sound ng audience. Pag palaging bukas yun, nagkakaroon ng echo. Itong reverb na ito, mas lalala. Kasi may distance eh. So, ang application ng ng gate, ikakabit mo yung mikrofonong yun dun sa gate. So pag nagtawanan, malakas, bubukas siya. So pick up niya ngayon yung sound nung congregation. Pag tumahimik na sila, sasara. O di tahimik na naman. Ang problema lang dun, dapat you have to be very careful in adjusting kasi napuputol yun eh. Kasi sarat bukas lang yun eh. Yun. So that's another thing that you can actually do if you're doing streaming. Pwede kayo maglagay ng isang mikrofono just to capture the sound of the audience. Kasi maganda rin yun eh, habang kumakanta yung praise and worship, di ba? Tapos kumakanta yung congregation, nadidinig dun sa online yung kanta ng congregation. Maganda rin yun. Di ba? So artistically, you can actually do that also as well. Okay? Meron pa? Information overload ba o okay lang? Yeah. Okay. Okay, so wala nang questions? No, nothing whatsoever? Okay na kayo? Okay, so I advise you to just listen well and experiment. And like I said, ang importante niyan is that you balance everything else and you always think, together with the praise and worship group, you always think in terms of what you are supposed to be doing. This is not a show. It is for a church, it's really for God. So yun ang palagi niyong isipin. Siguro, mag-ano tayo? Closing prayer, Pastor?
I'm sorry to cut this, Tomorrow is Sunday and I'm aware meron po sa atin na uuwi na malayo. So maybe some other time we could schedule another like this, Okay, sige, let's all stand and let's close in prayer. Our Father in heaven, salamat po for the time we have this afternoon. May you use all this knowledge na in-impart po sa amin ni Mike para po sa ikagaganda ng mga sound namin sa church, and may it all be for the glory of your name. Salamat po sa mga knowledge na natutunan namin, at kayo po ang magbigay sa bawat isa ng wisdom kung papaano po namin i-apply ito sa kani-kanyang sitwasyon sa church. We pray for everyone sa kanila pong pag-uwi. We pray for traveling mercies for everyone and also for Mike. At thank you for his life and for his willingness sa kanya pong pag-impart ng mga bagay na ito sa bawat isa. We bless your name. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. Amen. Mike, thank you so much for all these things. Yeah. God bless. Take care.